seems to me that the best way to organize ourselves is what I call then day before yesterday, yesterday, today, and visible tomorrow, and it could be tomorrow. That's five. There are five departments here. I'm going to start by thinking about what we know about humans and their relationship to the environment. I find that people tend to use the word environment in, to me, too small a way. They tend to think about their particular room or their particular city, their particular crowd. And I wrote this little poem, environment to each must be all that is excepting me. Universe in turn must be all that is including me. The only difference between environment and universe is me, the observer. Environment is all the otherness that complements the me, observer. And that's not only, there's a macro otherness and there's a micro otherness. There's a withinness and a withoutness of the observer. And we don't know too much about this. In the beginning of this century, when I was 5 years of age, reality was everything that human beings could see, smell, touch, and hear. It was only at the beginning of the century we have an awareness of Freud and Mesmer demonstrating that through hypnotism that there are subconscious behaviors. And that threw quite a monkey wrench into the reality, because little human beings, individuals, had not counted much in history. History had been the history of kings and heroes. The little individual not even having a right of trial. 170 years ago, an individual in England caught killing a rabbit could be hung without trial because that was a offense against the king. And the right of trial was a very extraordinary matter. So that's just we've known human beings for being on our planet for 2.5 million years, and that the little individual would have any real rights is a very, very new matter. And when he did have those rights, we finally have the opening of the century. When I said I was 5 years of age, here was reality, everything you could see, smell, touch, and hear. And so while you're being tried, if you're healthy, you know just what you're doing. And you broke the law. I said, well, I didn't know the law. So I said, that is your fault. That's also an error on your part, because you know just what you're doing. Mesmer then and Freud, getting into their research of subconscious behaviors and demonstrating through hypnotism that human beings did have subconscious, threw a great monkey wrench into the court trials. And since that time, we do have psychiatrists showing up whether was a person really aware. This began to change the concept of reality. Only when I was born, Marconi discovered the principles of the wireless telegraph. And I was 12 years of age, however, when we had the first SOS, even though Marconi kept going on with others and doing experiments, and they had a transatlantic message by wireless. It was not everybody's business at all. Cables were being used. So the radio was something very new, the very word radio. When I was 3 years of age, man discovers the electron. So that these are very, very recent events, the electronics things that we know. I was 23 years of age when the first human voice goes on the radio, and I was in the Navy, and I was in part of the experiment, talking between a plane and a ship with Dr. DeForest. And I was 27 when I had the first broadcasting station. Now, I want you to realize how very recent radio, anything to do with radiation is. It was just, again, in that same period that we discovered each of the chemical elements has unique frequencies. And by 1932, the depth of the depression, the first chart in history was published of what we call electromagnetic spectrum. Most people think that must be something all the time, but it's very recent. And with the publishing of it, having discovered each chemical element has unique frequencies, and so the absolute reality of those chemical elements was their frequencies. The fact that they seem to be solid, some of them, was simply because the frequency was so high you couldn't put your finger between the frequencies. But the reality was the frequencies, and they were very heavy and so forth because they're very high frequency in here. Now, here's the electromagnetic spectrum. So this is the reality. All the different substances. Here were the great long radio waves. Here were you can finally get to infrared, and then suddenly there's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, where man could tune in and began to realize that all these frequencies were the word color. If you want to use the word color, then that's the frequency. So all these elements had invisible to us colors. We couldn't tune in, and there was just a few frequencies we did tune in. Now we know that where human beings can actually smell, touch, see, and hear is less than a millionth of reality. Now, this is quite a change from the 20th century and 19th century, where suddenly opening the 20th century, reality is everything you see, smell, touch. That was very up to the minute. That suddenly it is now reality is a millionth of what we can touch. So we've learned a very great deal in this century. We're dealing then and by mechanical extensions of instruments. We've gotten into humanity is dealing in 99.9% everything that is dealing in is going to affect our tomorrow is invisible or non-touchable by the human senses. So that is the new reality. And each room, if you cup your hands, and any place in the universe where there are over 2 million programs right as you cup your hands inside there. And if you had the right set to tune in, you could bring in right here in this room a program being sent by the sensors on some of these satellites telling where every beef cattle on Earth is. That's part of the new reality. That's in this room, where every beef cattle is on the planet, where all the people are. So we haven't caught on to that reality at all, and I found the newspaper still carrying on the reality of see, smell, touch, and hear, and have no proper accreditation of what it is we're really dealing in a completely unified world where all of us now a split second apart from one another around the planet, because it takes at 700 million miles an hour. Your time for the radio wave to go around to India, our antipodes is split second. So talking then about what we've learned about humanity with those instruments, we've learned a very, very great deal, and we still are carrying on enormous momentums of the way of looking at things before the great reality of smelling, touching, hearing, or even the human beings didn't count, and only the kings counted, the way the history is written. So we're very far out of adjustment with what we really are knowing, what we know theoretically, and what we have actually, the way we tune ourselves and what we accredit to one another as reality. You may say, don't be nonsense. I'm a realist. So people who are usually saying that are the most unrealistic people I do know. What do I know about human beings in a really quite big way? One is that we can take on all 92 of at least 91 of the regenerative chemical elements. But these chemical elements that come to us for resupply come along with our foods or our breathing or our drinking. And at my age, I'm now 80, I've now processed over 1,000 tons of food, air, and water of new supplies of chemicals that associate and dissociate for short and long periods. So I'm sort of a headquarters for converging of universes from the airs. I think of the chemical elements with the air coming over the Himalaya mountains a month ago or a week ago, and they've just come. I've just breathed them in now, and they left someplace maybe in the Africa, and suddenly they're in. So, and the water's going to get in the skies, and the same chemical elements and keep reassociating, disassociating all over the world, and they get a very high association in human beings. And human beings represent the highest abundance of complex behaviors we know of. That is, when Darwin involved his theory of evolution as going from the simple, compounding the simple to make the complex. This is a time when human beings, again in their reality, looked for the building block, the key. They like that one thing to explain everything. This is called monological, and didn't realize it. And just in 1922, we have the physicists for the first time recognize something called complementarity. There's something, the oneness doesn't get on all right by itself. But only in 1956, and we're talking back then 20 years ago, do we have the Nobel Prize given for by the physicists who discovered the complementaries were never mirror images of one another. We'd had up to that time something called parity, assuming that the complementaries were just mirror images. Suddenly discovered they're not that. And this then goes along with what that we just discovered, the neutron. We're able to explain the irregularity of the atomic weights, which were seen to be almost the same as the same number of electrons, but some little off, and turned out that there were neutrons in there that made all the isotopes. And so we have today neutron and proton always and only coexisting. The physicists have said there never could have been a universe of disorder. There was never an a priori chaos, because we have an inherent orderliness of the proton and neutron always and only coexisting. They're different mass. So then, in a sense, they're complementaries, but not a mirror image of one another. One is interchangeable in the other, but only by virtue of each one having two energy sidekicks. And by virtue of the energy sidekicks, they can transform one into the other, though they're different mass. But they always and only coexist. So we have only then, for 20 years, a knowledge that we have a unity that is inherently plural. There's no monological explanation or anything. But go back to Darwin then. He is doing his thinking with other biologists, a time when Dalton was the great physicist, and Dalton was assuming that the chemical elements all were made up of hydrogen, that this is the building block. And it was quite logical for Darwin in biology then to look for his building blocks. So he looked for the cell, the single cell creature. So here was an amoeba. And it looks like you build everything up out of everything, because all the biologicals seem to have these cells. However, we find that there was the chemical elements were involved, and Darwin was not thinking about that, and Dalton at that time, the knowledge of all the chemical elements we're going to find. I now look at for the way we have fingerprints, and we have absolute uniqueness. I take the relative abundance of chemical elements in the various biological organisms. So then in the oyster, we get down to the single amoeba, and we have relatively few chemical elements. I get to an oyster or a lily have quite different relative abundance of the chemical elements present. But we get to the human being, every one of the chemical elements are present, provided they were available in the environment. And if the same individual who doesn't have a deficiency gets in the right environment, and in Michigan, copper and spinach co-occur. Copper is toxic to you now, directly taken, but if the spinach grows in the presence of copper, it takes it on, and then it can feed into you and I. This is to be understood in the terms of gears. If you have a pair of gears, one goes clockwise and the counterclockwise, you can understand that perfectly. As long as you have even numbers of gears, you get positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. The minute you get odd numbers of gears, you get positive, negative, negative. And one of them blocks. All odd numbers block, and all the toxics are when you get a blockage. And everything that is so the copper can come into it, so it comes in the right number of gears. So if the spinach takes it on first, then you and I eat the spinach. Then we get our copper, all right. Now, to understand then the human beings, then I found out this, apparently have only one other phenomena that I can compare to the human being. When I take the relative abundance of all the chemical elements that are present or could be present in terms of the trace element studies that Henry Schroeder went into, where he found that the difference between diabetes and non-diabetes is one atom of chromium. So these trace differences make all those differences. Now, I then tried, Here's a human being, and they take the relative abundance of all the chemical elements, and he's the one that has all of them. Find only one counterpart, and that's the universe itself. The relative abundance of chemical elements coming together to make the human being has only one counterpart. That's the total universe. We seem to be, each of us, sort of a miniature universe. This gets to be very interesting. I find them quite easy. We have all experience of what we call inbreeding. Enormous amount of hybriding has been done, or inbreeding, by human beings since they first discovered animals and various vegetations that are favorable to man. They began to learn how to domesticate those or inbreed them to have higher abundance of the characteristics that are favorable to man. So if you take two fast-running horses and match them, and you concentrate the high fast-running genes, but you do so by breeding out general adaptability. So if you get very good fast-running horses, you've got to look out for them. They're really quite helpless in other ways. They have to be very carefully looked out for. So you have, they're looking out for them. You are doing such thing as, for instance, we're going to give you a heart operation. I can have a mechanical heart to keep you going while I get the other heart out here to work on it. So you have to have accessories, so that when you inbreed, special high capability, losing general adaptability, to take care of the infrequent, alternate conditions of the environment to challenge that life, you have to have some kind of accessory equipment over the standby to do various things. So, and ecologically, we find that many special flies and special horses and so forth, they live as a group, and one can't really get on without the other. They are really the accessories of a main assembly and so forth. The universe is a priori complex. Is in a priori a plural kind of unity where the complementaries are there and they're not the same. Universe is inherently complex, a great plurality of principles, such as the principles of leverage or the principles of refraction of light. These are quite different. The diffusion from convexity and concentration by concavity. These are principles, and they're plurality of principles. The universe is inherently complex, and human beings are inherently complex, and the principles cannot be principles unless they're eternal. They must not have any exception. So we have a plurality of eternal complexity. And so to have you don't have to explain human beings, and it's on an a priori chaos out of which you get an original orderliness. And you try to build up orderliness from out of the chaos, which is the way man had been looking at things. And he did that because human brains are dealing always with special cases, and that are always terminal. They like to have a beginning and an ending of things. That's the brain. But human mind discovers the interrelationships which are eternal. And so mind and brain are very different phenomena. And the brain of man, which in many other creatures demanded a beginning and ending, there's really very ignorant kind of a demand of an information. So we have to outlive that, and we have not outlived this. We have all these kind of explanations of how we began and end. Now getting at what we do know, what we have been able to find out with these instruments and discovering principles and orderliness that is operative, I find the human beings to be about halfway between the largest and the smallest known creatures and assemblies. So and this should not be thought of as as a column or a line array, but it's an omnidirectional kind of a bigness and a littleness, and a macrocosmic bigness and a microcosmic where there are various organisms inside of us and organisms within organisms, and we may be part of a larger organism, but there is withoutness and withinness here, but should be always thought of in that kind of way. Now, next thing, not only are we about in the middle of sizes of things, magnitudes, but we have to be distinguished from all other known living organisms in the following way. All the other living organisms, other than human beings, have built-in integral equipment that gives that organism a special advantage in special environments. This particular vine can grow beautifully up the Amazon, but no place else. The bird can fly beautifully in the air with those wings, but when it's not flying, which is a great deal of the time, he can't get rid of his wings, so he's greatly incumbent as he tries to walk around with this special equipment for special environments when he's not using it. The human beings, in contradistinction, while they have brains, and many other creatures have brains, those brains are always The function of the brain is a very clear matter. Uh, it is always for coordinating the inputs of the senses. All the thing is seeing, smelling, hearing, and remember each of those special. It's special because this one is distinguished from the other because it smells differently. So brain always special cases, storing special cases, remembering and recalling them. And minds alone, from time to time, discover relationships existing between the special cases that are eternal relationships, quite independent of the special case data. The mind of man discovering interrelationships, such as Bernoulli discovering pressure differentials in gases, discovering the effect of a penetrated medium by a penetrated body. And for instance, explaining then the Wright brothers wing foil, which the bottom of which is flat and the top pitch is curved, the same air being opened up at the leading edge and going by the flat surface has a lesser distance to go than does going around the round surface. So the same amount of air going greater distance has to be thinned out and makes in a negative pressure. And Bernoulli principle then explained why the Wright brothers wing foil worked, why the bird's wing foil worked, but there's lift that you have. We have then human beings with their minds discovering principles and the calculatability, the beautiful mathematical relationships that are existing. We're able then to make themselves wings and to fly 10 times now faster than the bird, but to take off their wings when they're not using them and let somebody else use the wings, or they can melt them up and make better wings. In other words, human beings are right in the middle, and all the other creatures have this special equipment built in that's always becoming they really only can get on and prosper in the special environments. That's where they're at their best. But human beings can get on in any environment. Learning principles, then we've been able to dive deeper than the whale, to swim much faster than the whale. We're able to go out out of the air where there's no air at all, out of the biosphere. We're able to go then into environments that have previously been utterly hostile by virtue of principles and taking on the environment controlling equipment. Momentarily, we're able to operate in the universe in an entirely different way from all the other creatures. Now, this to me is the most fundamental difference, and we don't know of any other phenomena than humans having mind, or the ability to discover principles and employ principles. So the bird is employing principles, but inadvertently. I find that all due to the phenomena entropy, that is, every system takes on energy, and every system gives off energy. And the energy is given off, a great second law of thermodynamics, every system must be giving off energies. This is called entropy. And the energy is given off at different rates, and other systems giving off energy at their different rates. So as the energy is given off, they've come out of an orderly system, but in relation to other systems giving off energy, the given off seem to be disorderly or different kind of frequencies and abundances, so that there's consideration of entropy having increase of disorderliness and it being expansive, like the radiation given off by the stars. However, we get to a point where there's a maximum disassociation and new regroupings, and an orderly regrouping where atoms from this system over there and another system there get into critical proximity. There's a mass attraction and begin to associate. And they have chemical associability, whatever it may be, and we have a new system growing. So there are syntropics and entropics. So syntropics for things are coming together in an increasingly orderly manner, and systems are coming apart in an increasingly disorderly manner. Now, thinking about all the organisms of the creatures, because that's what I'm about to talk about for the moment, just differentiating the organisms that we know about in contradistinction to the human beings. All these organisms, including human beings, are giving off energies in the way of dissociated chemistry. And I spoke about myself as having taken on 1,000 tons of chemistries, of liquids, solids, and gases, and associating them temporarily and giving them off at different rates at different times, and these become available to join other systems. And then I see that the given off energies by any one organism alter the environment. All the otherness is altered by each one. So the altered environment then requires adjustability to the altered environment. So the environment itself then was causing adaptation, and the environment was changing, so that we have changing special organisms getting on these special equipment. We tend to really multiply the different types of environment that must be coped with by special creatures. And we find the creatures themselves developing by inbuilt equipment rather than the way in which the human being does it through the mind and developing special equipment to cope with it, and then dissociating from it. I find then that all organisms alter the environment, and some organisms alter the environment in very discrete ways, and they alter the environment in ways that if they don't alter the environment that way, they cannot exist. We'll say the mole is altering the environment by making a tunnel and continually having to have those tunnels. And it doesn't have any eyes, he gets in great deal of trouble. We got out with any light in needing eyes. So he must get on by controlled trackways, which he makes very nicely, and he can get at great varieties of roots and so forth and get on very well. Well, he gets all the chemistry needed in that kind of way. We find the birds having to make nests. In order to be a bird, you have to do a great deal with very little. You have to be able to fly. Performance per pound must be very, very high. So the bird is designed to take on fuel, quite high frequency, in small amounts at any one time, so not to overweight himself with the fuel. And so the bird then, in order to have new birds to regenerate and have then has to get over if it was going to carry the new bird in a womb, it would get so heavy that it couldn't reach make these high frequency accomplishments of what it needs to take in chemistry in the way of food. So that the bird has then developed all the gestation process that usually goes on in the womb. They put all the chemistry for it, the nutriment, and they put it all in an egg so that the bird can get it out of itself in a hurry, produce it very rapidly, and get it out of itself in a hurry. And then it needs only one more thing. It has all the right chemistry. It needs one chemical called energy as heat. And energy is heat at a very special temperature for a given amount of time. You can't just give it a lot of heat, you boil it. Or you fry it. You got absolutely the right temperature, the right amount of time. So they develop the nest, and the nest is then an extension really of the womb to insulate, be sure it doesn't lose the heat, get it critical, and positioning the nest. The males tend to do sort of experimental flying of where the nest is going to be, because they operating not on a highway but an omnidirectional medium where they can go into the earth and outwardly and omnidirectionally. So they pick a point in a tree where they then make experimental flights to see how far you have to go to get the insect you're going to need, the female is going to need. When she leaves the nest, she must be able to get to the insect or the food and back to the egg before it gets below its critical temperature, because she's going to give it the rest of that heat exactly the right. But in the nest, then it prevents it from losing heat, and she's sitting on top of it, and she'll give you the heat exactly the right way, and everything was designed for this flying. So you'll often see two male birds of the same species seemingly fighting out on the lawn. It's because they're making experimental flights from trial positions where nests are going to be able to see if they run into interference with them. So they must then spread apart, more like two soldiers in line must get where their shoulders are spread out, be comfortably. So there must be spherical domains of flying for each one where they don't touch each other. So when those two male birds see themselves doing, then they go back and they decide which one is going to do the spreading out. That's what the little battling about there is. And so we have then this beautiful design of the bird to regenerate, then externalizing part of its life, instead of having gestation inside, making a nest. And because you don't have birds all the time. You don't have to have the new birds. You have it once a year will do, in order as a frequency, in order to keep that particular species successful. So what nature does is to allow these various creatures to separate out and develop external apparatus where it isn't something you do all the time. If it's high frequency thing, you have it integral because you're going to use the wings very frequently, so you keep the wings built in. But the womb function is something you can externalize, and the nest then becomes really part of the womb. The egg was part of the womb. You leave that egg out there, and you leave that nest there, and you may come back to it next year or not. But it is an externalized part of the absolute regeneration of that species. So I found then the alterations in the environment are from time to time an integral to the species survival, but not integral with the organism itself. It can be separated from them and only employ them periodically, these extensions. So I call then all the discrete alterations in the environment, this is an inadvertent alteration in the environment when the seabirds pick up shellfish when they're low tide and they can reach one of them, they take a sea urchin. They fly to considerable height and drop it on the rock because they learn about gravity and smash it, and they can come down there and get the little creatures inside their shell. But they leave the splash shell all around, and they don't try to clean that up. And that splash shell is really nothing to do with their particular survival, though other kinds of creatures come along and use the calcium, whatever the chemistry may be that is operating there. So this is not for that particular species, but ecologically it is a form of chemistry sortings out where there'll be an enormous amount of shells and particular rocks and other things that can then go on under due to this chemical concentration. Now, I see then when various creatures make discrete alterations in the environment that are essential to the survival of that species, I call that a tool. That a nest is a tool. Humans are not unique as tool builders. And I found then the spider making its web, beautiful plastic extrusion, no longer a spider cell, cut off from it, extrudes it out of itself, then runs around in it. And it uses to catch its fly, wrap it up very beautifully as a storage for when it's going to need its particular kind of chemistry and food. And so these are tool makers. So humans are not unique as tool makers. But humans are unique in the amount of tooling they make. When I spoke about mind discovering principles and employing the tools much more than the other creatures. They are almost completely tools, and everything is mind and principle. Unlike the other creatures, I find that they alter the tools, and they can substitute a tool for a tool. Whereas the bird's nest remains, you can recognize orioles' nests and seagulls' nests, whatever it may be. They're absolutely unique, and they never change the design. Once in a while, a bird inadvertently changes the design because it picks up a nylon fiber instead of a wood fiber, and they didn't know the difference. But the nest begins to behave a little differently due to the plenitudinous of stockings that are coming apart and so forth that get picked up by various kinds of birds. The mockingbird really likes very much the silk stockings. He tries to pull hair out of horses, and then he finds he can pull it out of silk stockings even. So it inadvertently gets some new kinds of chemistry going in the nests. But I say that isn't by conscious design on the part of the creatures. So any evolution in the tools of the other creatures other than human beings is not a conscious design change. But in the part of the human beings, they design in pure principle. And we'll find, for instance, Galileo discovering that the principle of the lever, which man had learned about long, long ago, and man thought about it simply as a bar, a tree, and he had a fulcrum tree, a rock, and he had a load to lift over here. So he got the short end under the load, and he got on the long end of the lever, and he found the longer the lever and the stronger it was, so it didn't bend or break, the greater the weight he could lift. And finally, one little man is lifting weights that took the muscles of 20 men and 30 men. Fantastic thing going on here. So this is an advantage which he discovers in principle. And the distance from the fulcrum to the load is a basic increment. If you get out even amount, you have 1 to 1. If you get out two distances, get 2 to 1. And then Galileo discovers that, well, the fulcrum need not have been a hard rock or another log to roll on here, but it could be a lashing around a tree, and your rod went through that lashing. So it could be a tension one rather than compression. Then he found he could go even further. And if you take your rope and ran it through a pulley block and another pulley, every time you went once more around the pulleys, you had another increment of the lever. And exactly the same mathematical law is applying in tension. So we can see how man's able to alter his design by understanding the principles and the mathematics of it, where it might look quite differently, set of pulley blocks from what we thought of as this kind of lever. But all machinery is simply various uses of the principles of leverage. We call it mechanical advantage, which can be mathematically calculated. Now, human beings then have been able to alter the environment, and in fact, they get on with the environment by having no integral equipment, very poor. Our hands are only to get a hold of the instruments and the ends of the tools, and not really to be. We find a human being, for instance, an early berry picker. He's born naked, helpless, ignorant, which we'll talk more about. Being born naked, helpless, ignorant, he's also given hunger and thirst. So he needs to, he wants something. He instinctively, I got to get something into my mouth here. And he sees a red berry, and that looks great. And somebody tries in, and they fell down dead. So for 10,000 years, they say humans can't eat berries. Then somebody discovers there's some berries you can eat. And so there's red berry is not dangerous and green berry is safe. They found it's not that way either. So it took a long amount of cataloging what you can, what you can't. Anyway, man's berry picking now, and he suddenly he's very thirsty. And he's gone so far away from the water, it's pretty desperate. He finds some water and needs terribly to get that water, and so he plunges in, and it goes up his nose, and so that's not very useful. Then he tried licking it like a cat. It doesn't get enough. So then he finds it with a hand. He cups his hand and get more, but he gets two hands, he cup even more. He can pour it in without getting up his nose. So this is a great way. He said, now, boy, I'm feeling great again. I'm now hungry after some other berries. So every time I go after berries, I lose my water. And I can't keep my hands full of water and pick berries. So he invents then a pair of hands. He sees that he can make a cup, he can make a vessel. So amongst the earliest of the artifacts we find human beings making as tools are containers for liquids and so forth. This is a controlled environment. So they bring the controlled environment with them. So then they find he can cup the hands not only this way, but he also cup it this way. Keeps it won't splash out. So he makes a closed vessel. So all the bottles and all, these all came out of man doing this first. And so then he finds he has a closed hands. He can put the bottle on his back and carry, he's got the water with him. And frees his hands for or he may leave the container by the well. So when he gets there, he can handle much more than he could with his hand, much faster. So we found everything at sea in the way of it. Gas tanks, ships of the sea, they're all extensions of man originally learning about this with his hands, differentiating between the liquids and the gases and so forth, the air outside and the liquid inside. It's all tools then, were originally functions that are integral in the human being equipment. But he learns the principles of operating there, and he feels that, and then he develops tools to employ those principles. We don't have a single tool of human beings that are not extensions of originally integral capabilities and functions in the individual. But he has the least of all the built-in special equipment. He has all this externalized special equipment. This is human being. Now, so I would like to dwell on this just a little more, but I have him now where I've placed him as the middle of all things, and he's the only one we know is dealing in principles, and the principles are inherently eternal. So here's a special human being in the middle of all the organisms, and all the others having more and more special equipment, and more and more special, the shorter the lives and so forth. He has a extraordinary capability. And just in my lifetime, for instance, he's learned how to stay around here in this environment twice as long, and has been able to get into environments where no human beings ever could be before with great safety. So I've seen him changing his relationship to the universe very, very greatly by virtue of his mind that none of the other creatures have this kind of capability. That's always built for special equipment for special environments. And the more specialized, the more terminal and dangerous for them. Now, go back to the main observation we have to make, that all human beings have always been born naked, absolutely stark naked, absolutely helpless for months, have to be lifted around, and beautiful equipment, but no experience, so are absolutely ignorant. So all born naked, helpless, ignorant. Now, quite clearly, such an organism could not be born where it's going to freeze to death because we're 60%, more than 60% water. And water boils and freezes within very small limit changes. And the minute we get out of the biosphere, we get into cold where you just freeze to death just like that automatically. Or you get into something like the sun and you're just going to perish for the heat. that for us to be designed the way we are, as hydraulically compressioned, not bricks and steel beams, but actually hydraulically compression. You know, I can blow up a football, but gas is compressible. Liquids are non-compressible, so we're blown up with liquid. So we have this beautiful muscle here. We just that's liquid in there. We get water in there in a hurry to do this terrific job. And liquids distribute their loads, like the pressure on an automobile tire goes to the whole casing, to the whole tube, in all directions. Not crystallines do not distribute loads. The way we build houses with bricks and steel doesn't distribute any loads. But liquids and gases do. We never could move the kind of machinery we make of tools, which I'll get into a little more, but identifying them, the word machinery in contradistinction to just simple word tool, or simple functions. So as we get into moving machinery around, we couldn't possibly do it if we didn't have pneumatic tire to distribute the loads. It's just shocked to pieces right away. So I see the way we build buildings, everything is incredibly ignorant because nature doesn't build it. She builds hydraulic and pneumatics and uses crystalline only in tension. I'd like to get to thinking about, for the moment, about a tree. You've seen many, many trees, and you've seen great trees and great winds and their branches all doing this extraordinary thing. They have a very great function, which we'll get into later, which is to impound all the sun radiation to keep life going on our planet, because you and I can't take a sun bath and get enough energy to keep going, so the vegetation does that for us. And doing that has exposed an enormous amount of leafage. It has to have the strength to take all the enormous winds, which are going to be necessary to even transport the seeds around. All this wind, all this is part of the design. So here's this beautiful tree doing this lovely thing. Now, if you try to pick up 2 suitcases of, say, 35 pounds each, which is a pretty good size, pretty good load, you try to hold it out horizontally, you just find you can't do that. Many branches of a tree weighs 5 tons. To hold 5 tons out horizontally, when you try to hold 30 pounds up, you can't do it. 5 tons out horizontally, boy, this is some strength. And how can you possibly do that? Well, it's done through hydraulics. Liquids are non-compressible. And liquids distribute all their loads. In order to have this beautiful tree there, then, what nature does is ship in the seed a tension pattern. Now, I'm going to get into tension and compression and hydraulics and liquids for a minute because I'd like to have everybody feel these. I want you to think about a simplest form that has insiders and outsiders. Everything we call substance has insiders and outsiders. Maybe a cloud is a substance, it has insiders and outsiders. And to have the simplest insiders and outsiders, it takes four points of what we call the tetrahedron. So the simplest possible system we could have, having insiders and outsiders, which is the simplest system or simplest substance, would be something that was a tetrahedron. Four triangular faces, 4 points. Now I'm going to take 2 tetrahedra, and I'm going to join them with just one corner, because what do they have? They have corners, they have edges, and they have faces. I'm going to join, and remember, each of these faces are triangles, so each face has 3 corners. I'm going to take one corner of each and touch them. They have mass attraction to one another, or magnetic attraction, so they fasten like a universal joint. Just touching, you can rotate them around again, a universal joint. Now, if I take 2 corners of the tetrahedron and have them touched together, now I get a hinge, which is very different from a universal joint. While it's still mobile, it operates only around an axis. Then I'm going to have 3 points touch each other. This would be triple bonding. This would now be what we call in engineering fixed end or 3-point landing. And for the note now with 3 points, you can't move anymore. This is crystalline. The hinge is liquids, and the universal joint is the gases. Because if I fasten a great many tetrahedra together, all the same size tetrahedra, just one corner to one corner each one, you find they take up and make a very large amount of space. And they're so universal that they can fold it so they can go back and inside of themselves. So this total group are compressible. But if I fasten them just edge to edge, a double bonded, a hinge like the liquids, while there's motion in there, you find it makes what we call the octahedron tetrahedron truss, omnitriangulated, and it is non-compressible. While it distributes the load, so the liquids have extraordinary property of being non-compressible yet distributing loads due to the fact there is motion in them. And we find then the crystallines do not permit any motions. So the crystallines do not distribute loads. So they have to absorb things very locally. But crystallines have 3 points, therefore, if we try to pull them apart, they have three tension bondings. The liquids have only 2 tension bondings, and the gases only 1 tension bond. So the gases have the least tensile coherence. The liquids have next, this we call viscosity in the liquids, and the crystallines have the highest tension. So what does nature designing a tree? She ships a seed which has all the instructions for using the local gases and the local liquids, the local waters in the environment. She only ships the pattern of tension design for the crystallines. And she makes up these little crystalline fibers. The crystalline fibers make sacs that contain the liquids. And in tubular form, so you get capillary traction, which can operate anti-gravity. They have these beautiful tubes filled with liquids. And the liquids then do all the compressing. So she ships the instructions for the tension enclosures. And crystallines have the high tension. So nature, in both designing you and I as human beings or trees, has all the crystallines only in tension functions. She does all the compressions in liquids, which are non-compressible but distribute loads. And she has hidden in between various liquid molecules, she has gaseous molecules, and they take care of the shock load. So the great tree holding out 5 tons, a branch here, waving in the wind, the shock load and the waveability is in the gases which are in there, which are incompressible to just take a load without losing the basic shape. I find human beings, then as designers, being really, really very clumsy because they learn first that being born a naked, helpless, ignorant, we have to remember that's where they start. Yet finally they learn something about principles, but not too many people know. At present time, for instance, only 1% of humanity are actually educated in technology and science. That is 40 million people. So that's quite a lot of people to say 40 million people are scientists and technologists. But you got 99%, which is 4,999,000 human beings who don't understand, because so far science says everything is pure mathematics, and you have to understand mathematics. You don't read the mathematics, you can't understand science. So we have a very large ignorance in part of humanity about the things I'm talking to you about, and they find, well, gravity, if I put a stone on top of the stone, the gravity holds it there, so well, if I pick this up and put it there, it's going to stay there. So I can build a stone wall, and build a castle, and they just piled it up. Great compressional, crystalline compressions with no distributions of loads at all. They have compression to compression, no distribution. I find almost all of man's building is then does not distribute loads. Everything has to take local shocks. We're incredibly overbuilt. The only place where man has done a very beautiful piece of design when they said he had to develop some beautiful machinery and then he wanted to move it. And he had first on railroad tracks, and then he learned how to make automobiles. But he only make but even the railroad, they had to have springs in there because there were shock loads from the tracks of the compression to compression, solid to solid. Then in the automobile, they had to get pneumatic tires, and that really distributed the loads. And so this beautiful machinery did not get shocked because the gases were distributing loads. When it came to really having a very important kind of, we take a Boeing 747 weighing 150 tons fully loaded, landing, hitting the Earth at 150 miles an hour, hitting the Earth 150 miles an hour with 150 tons, you expect to get quite a smash up. But we do this beautiful landing. What happens is he uses hydraulic gear. The landing gear comes down there, is hydraulics. And the hydraulics distribute the liquids through enormous number of tubes, and there's frictions in tubes to use up and then has first the pneumatic tires take the shock load, and then the big load goes into the hydraulics. It's only in the landing gear of an airplane that man is using same kind of design nature is doing for all the trees and all the human beings and all the organisms. He's been that slow to catch on to principles. Now, I want to come back to how slow he is in catching on to principles. I'm sure that human beings then had their muscle and they started always lifting the load with their muscle. Instinctively pick the thing up. I don't know whether you've ever gone through the forest, but I imagine you have been through some forests. As far as you know, nobody's been there before. And you want to go, there's no paths and no road, but you want to get over there. And you know, if you get through the forest, you've been given a map and your family are over there, there's something you go for. So you want to work your way through. And you find trees that have fallen different ways, and that way the great winds and hurricanes. So if you're trying to get from here to there, there's a tree falling in your way, you're pushing the bushes apart. There's a great big tree, but it's fallen almost in the direction you're going. So I say, I think I'll get up on top of that tree, and better than pushing through the bushes, I'll walk along its top. So you do, and there's a man that's doing that, and he's walking along top of this big tree, and suddenly the tree begins to he feels it sinking, goes a little further, and it sinks a little faster, so a rather slow elevator going, descending. So he retreats and comes back, and it comes up again. He finds that further out it goes, the faster it sinks, but if it comes back, it comes right up again. So what's going on here? I got a magic tree. It's an enormous tree. I can't move that. Obviously, I couldn't move it at all, but it's moving. So it goes out and back and forth. Finally, he finds that the tree that he's going out on, one here is lying across another tree below it. And the other end of the tree that he's going out on, having gone over this tree, is under a great big tree over here. And as he goes out here, he turns around, he sees that this enormous tree is being lifted over there. So, good God, I can't lift a tree like that. So he goes over and tries it with his muscle, he can't budge it. He walks out on the tree he's been walking out on, and this great big tree lifts over there. So he gets the whole tribe. He said, I got a very magic tree here. So they pull the tree that he's walking on, is able to lift it. They bring it home, and they make a totem pole of it. It's an incredible tree. So they worship it for a great many centuries. And then one of the wise one day said, I think any tree would do. So you discover the lever. I just want the way things really come into human beings use. I think it's very, very probably usually very amusing. We find then human beings, the difference between them and all the other creatures, being their ability to discover principles and the ability to employ the principles objectively, in special case machinery. But so far, really, due to the fact 99% of humanity is scientifically ignorant, illiterate, due to the sciences saying that science can only be understood through mathematics. That is not, they've made it non-conceptual, and I'm going to point out later on, as I get into what I call synergetics and so forth, that there is conceptuality, and conceptuality may return, if we have a bridge between the humanists and the scientists by conceptuality of mathematics, then we may have 9% of humanity who have not been able to understand, and realizing it isn't just formulas, but it really is, it is conceptual. And that is the function of synergetics. I don't want to do any more to allude to it now, because in all my discourse, I never ask anybody to believe something or just take something for granted. I don't want to ask you to accept that. I am, however, in reviewing what we know about humans so far and finding all creatures, phenomena entropy operative, and the creatures, some of them altering the environment discreetly, which is part of the survival of that species, and human beings and being the most important of the environment employers to employing the principles that are operative in respect of the human mind finding principles operating and able then to employ those principles and able to get in its environments. But so far, I see the human beings then enormously overwhelmed by the traditions and the explanations been given them by the 99.99% non-scientific, just experience patterns where mom and dad say, Grandpa learned you can't do that, and the chieftain learned you can't do that, so you have rules how to carry on. And I find very few of the human beings employing the capability they really have, which is to think and discover principles. They've been, as I was brought up even, in, I was fifth generation to go to Harvard in the New England environment of where scholarship was considered very important, but I was continually being told, never mind what you think, listen, we're trying to teach you something. It was a working assumption. Thinking was absolutely unreliable. That knowledge was a body, building up a body of knowledge, and the people who were educated had to give it to the kids, otherwise the kids saw empty milk bottles and absolutely unreliable. That is not going on right now. This is one of the great differences between yesterday and today, is the young world, nobody's saying to the kids, never mind what you think. I was also told, not only never mind what you think, listen, we're going to teach you something. And I was being told that I knew how much my mother loved me. She said, darling, never mind what you think, really pay attention to this man. He's really taking a whole lot of trouble to talk to you. He knows what he's talking about. And this man was saying to me, you got to get over all that sensitivity you were born with there. Life is tough. Get over yourself, get hard. And everybody's trying to get all the men hard. This all changed in a very abrupt manner, which I might as well get over with you right now, because I have mentioned earlier that only in my lifetime, when Marconi invents his wireless as I'm born, and in came this radio, and only when 1932, when I was 37 years of age, we had the first publishing of the great electromagnetic spectrum of the great new reality, which is a great invisible reality of where we can only deal with it through instruments, which only human beings that have minds are able to invent by learning principles of optics and electronics and social building, so whatever it may be. Only through principles are we able then to deal with the great new reality, which is 99.9% non-sensorially directly contactable. And that's all developed very big way, I said, just during my lifetime. Well, I pointed out to you earlier that when I was 23, we had the first human voice on the radio. And my parents had said, wireless, how crazy can you get? And I was 8 when my Wright brothers flew. I've been always brought up, it's inherently impossible for man to fly. So he's flying. All the things that I've been told were impossible beginning to happen. So this made me mildly skeptical of what I've been told by my elders. And many of the things that I'd been thinking, I began to find were happening. That my significance tended to be, so I became really, was one of those borderline cases when the young world is beginning to suddenly find that the old world is not reliable, but did not come in till just the period where I happened to be born into. So we have historically amongst the mammals, the male does not bear the young, and the female does so. She is weighted and has suckling problems and so forth. So she does not sweep out as large an area in the wilderness as does the male. The male wolves, for instance, sweep out a radius, the North American wolf, about 54-mile radius. Of female stays in a very much smaller area with the young and the old. So the male man, unquestionably historically, was a hunter, explorer, and he brought back to her, whether she had this nourishment for the young, he brings back some kind of creature, never seen one before, and she makes up her mind whether to kill it or to milk it or what to do with it. And she finally gets hybriding the things that turned out to be, well, right at home. So the hunting party didn't have to do the way he used to do. But anyway, for a long, long time, he's the hunter bringing home. Not only does he bring home the animals and foods that he can find, but he also brings home the news. And he found a new place so you can see this mountain over there, boy. And then he has what do the chieftains say, and what do the other chieftains, the other tribes that's attacking them say. He brings home all the news. He's the only one who does it. And the moms, seeing with the other moms, find out what their men are saying. So the kids then are learning from the parents, mom and dad, what all the news is, and what grandpa and grandma had learned, and what you can eat and what you can't eat. So the authority were the parents, and anything the children knew about the rest of life came through the parents. Parents were authority. So Daddy came home, and this is the way he heard it, but he heard it rather poorly, and this way his lips let him say it, because you're not used. So he said it in a very poor way, but Dad to the kid is authority, and that's the way the authority says. So kids always emulated Daddy. This brought about one dialect after another, and gradually in different languages. It's a very swift peeling off of how you communicated what it was that was being communicated. So there was a sloughing, musting, and depending on what kind of fish you ate or didn't eat, the way your tongue operated, where there are a lot of people that can make the F sound of father, but others can only make the vata. And that's the kind of things that are going on there. All right, now, Dad brings home the news. He and Mom are the authority. That was ipso facto. And in evidence to the kids, they were the authority. They could knock them around and do anything they wanted and tell this way it is to kids. And there was nothing to controvert their authority. In 1927, I was 32 years of age. And in May 1927, all the daddies are coming home in America and Europe and all around the world from their work. And kids said, "Hey, Daddy, come in here in a hurry. Listen to the radio. A man's flying across the Atlantic." I said, "What?" And Daddy never brought the news home ever since. So then the kids saw Dad and Mom listening to the radio. The people who got their job on the radio got it by virtue of the commonality of the diction rather than esoteric way of saying it. They got their job by virtue of their use of a wide vocabulary and saying it in a way that was commonly understood. They suddenly began to really bring back a unit language. And now Dad and Mom, the kids see Dad and Mom listening to the radio there, and the kids, Dad and Mom don't say to the kids, "I'm not the authority." It was in evidence to the kids that the authority was talking. They were listening to the authority. And this is the way the authority said it. So the kids spontaneously emulated the authority as they had Dad. This is a complete weaning that occurred, and nobody realized it. They didn't talk about it that way. They just talked about it in a very kind of superficial way about the enjoyment of it or something that's bad for the kids. But and the kids saw that Dad and Mom were listening, and the kids were learning to say it this way. This changed the whole speech pattern. When I was young, all the workmen that I worked with, very skilled craftsmen, really fine human beings, pretty worried. They watched about their tools, and they're not going to teach everybody their craft at all. I want to be sure they really liked you, and because this is what kept them alive, got them their jobs. But their vocabularies were very limited, approximately 100 words. 50% blasphemous or obscene. And the way they primarily talk is the way they spit. I felt about it. You would say something and they spit how you liked it. Now, this was humanity, and humanity was 90% illiterate when I was young. And all this changed overnight with the radio there, with the kids really learning the right words and learning how to say it. And Dad and Mom saw the kids were taking that on spontaneously. They realized that they would be belittled in their own children's estimation if they didn't learn it, so they began to learn that language. This utterly changed speech pattern in humanity, and it began literacy. And information really began to proliferate very, very rapidly. Now, speed of light in contradistinction to speed of sound in air. And the sound only operates as waves in gas. Speed of sound, approximately 700 miles an hour. Speed of light, 700 million miles an hour. Speed of light is 1,000,000 times faster than the speed of sound. The sound only operates in the biosphere. The light operates anywhere. We have the human eyes seeing Andromeda. And Andromeda is a live show taking place 1,000,000 years ago. It takes exactly 1,000,000 years for that light to get to us. So looking at the pole star, which we often do, and we're seeing a live show taking place 680 years ago. If you look at Orion's belt, which you often do, the two particularly bright stars there, one of those is a live show taking place 1,500 years ago, another 1,000 years ago. We find visually we can see up and down the ages. We can see 1,000,000 years ago. This is fantastic capability. So not only are we seeing sextillions of miles, but we're also seeing millions of years ago. So what information you get with the eyes is approximately 1,000,000-fold that which you get with the ears. So television was not just a sort of another gadget, it was a completely new magnitude of human comprehending. And we have the students who made the first world news as dissidents at Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley. The majority of them graduated in 1966. I met with their class and many of their contemporary classes at other universities that year. They were born the year that the television came in the American home. We have then a whole young world, now incredibly perceptive, information coming from around the whole world in split seconds. They're seeing what's going on in India right now. And they see all around the world everybody's in trouble. And every child is full of compassion. No longer could it just be for their friends next door, the local town. It's for the world. A completely new magnitude of consideration of that new world. So they said, I know Dad and Mom love me to pieces, and I love them to pieces, but they don't know what's going on. They were anything but authority. Nobody ever discussed it this way. It was simply ipso facto. And they said because Dad and Mom don't have anything to do with our going to the moon, they don't see anything to do with this, who gets elected. They don't really have anything to do with anything. And because they don't, and I see the world's in trouble, I've got to do my own thinking. I don't know so much so far, but I got to do my own thinking. This is an extraordinary new moment in the history of man. I see it as important to change the child in the womb for 9 months. And at any one time around our Earth, there's something like 40 million children in the womb. 40 million is the population of Nigeria, which is 1/4 of all the population of Africa. In other words, this is a very large population. We have all what I call the womblanders. The 40 million womblanders. It'd be a very extraordinary matter to suddenly come out of the womb. It's in a very different kind of situation. And all the womblanders have to have oxygen for their blood, but they're not outside, so they can't get it. So Mom gets all the oxygen and oxidizes their blood and connected by the umbilical cord, so their blood gets oxidized. When they come out, they cut the umbilical cord because they're now able to get their own information. Thinking about oxygen is really information which is part of the processing, metabolic processing. So I see then what nature did was to cut what I call, the children had to have information, being everybody born helpless, ignorant, and nature deliberately had ways of developing tradition of be sure to compound the information gained as time went on. And she brought up to the point where man had discovered enough principles to really employ those principles to really make things work, even though it was only 1% of humanity, which was science and technology. And even though they were organized, so they couldn't do anything initially unless the politician told them to do it. Things were a very awkward condition, but there was a breakthrough point where there were enough principles discovered, but man could really get on his own as he could without his own oxygen. So she cut the metabolical cord, I call it, and it's the umbilical cord. By metabolics, by metaphysical, I use the word meta, physical or metaphysical. At the time of Einstein, the physicists said, physics deals with energy. The physical world is energy. energy associated with matter, energy associated with radiation, one convertible into the other. But everything that is physical will move a needle, either gravitationally or radiationally, electromagnetically. And if it doesn't move a needle, then it is metaphysical. For instance, what goes on between you and I, even though we're making a recording here, what goes on is the understanding. The understanding is absolutely metaphysical, completely independent of the language we use and the particular sounds we're making, absolutely independent. The understanding does not move needles. So the metaphysical, I want to have very clear what the metaphysical and what is the physical. And so when you have the metabolical cord in contradistinction to the umbilical cord, so we have suddenly the metabolical cord was tradition, and tradition was suddenly cut again. And the kids were suddenly on their own, with the same minds that human beings always had, but enough principles, enough instruments, begin to have enough information to really get going on their own and have a totally different relationship to the universe. Just like the child out of the womb, out of the chicken out of the egg, different universe. So this is where we happen to be right this minute, and one reason why that we're even making such recordings. We have equipment to make such a recording. That we have just enough information, enough vocabulary to have a common language, which we didn't have yesterday. I'm in an extraordinary kind of position of straddling between the tradition era, absolute tradition, never mind what you think, get over your sensitivity. Now all the kids saying, if I'm going to do my own thinking, I've got to keep all that sensitivity. Boy, I need it very badly. And I got hair coming out here, and I don't know why I have hair, but it better come out, let it come out. This is a decision of extraordinary integrity. And I can't stand the idea of any of that pretense kind of clothing makes this man's not important because he's got that kind of clothing on. He's not important because he's got that Rolls Royce. So there was this beautiful thinking. And the break with tradition was horrendous. But I see this as actually total humanity coming out of common womb, a permitted ignorance with enormous resources, with which by trial and error, to make enough experiments to finally learn enough principles to really make it possibly outside. I find human beings then in the old traditional way, looking out for having such a word as leisure, that there's hard work to be done, you got to survive, then you suddenly had leisure, you see, sit back and really rest. I see we're getting to the point where we have enough principles to really handle all of our survival problems exactly the way nature has it. You and I are 99.999% automated. We have the slightest idea what the atoms are doing in our brains that makes it possible for you and I to be recording and handling this information and to come to understanding. We have the slightest idea what we did with our breakfast, which is probably going, some of it's going to this various glands. We're not rooting those glands. We're not deliberately making hair. We're not deliberately making new skin. We cut ourselves. We have nothing to do with the beautiful operation goes on, and they build up the scaffolding right away and rebuild that. And 99.9999% automated. And we now know enough about principles to really make all production looking out at humanity completely automated, leaving human beings really free to really use their beautiful minds to deal with principles and to be, I think we're here probably to be local monitors in universe, to be solving local problems of universe in connection with the eternal regeneration of universe, which is an extraordinary design in its own right. I have introduced then the concept of human beings with their minds, ability to discover principles. I've talked about all organisms altering the environment and the ones that alter it in discrete ways that are essential to survival. I call that those tools, and that man is not the unique only tool maker, but that he does it very completely. He lives with the tools. Most of them live partially with the tools. I come back to then all creatures, all organisms altering the environment entropically, inadvertently, some of them altering it discretely in ways that are essential to survival of that species, and finding the human being, that all the other species other than human being have some built-in integral equipment to take it, which it helps them with special environments. Human beings being in the middle and having only the mind, discovering principles, and then being able to employ those principles, or the principle of the leverage, or the refraction of light as a lens to make a camera, make a microscope and a telescope, getting into the invisible ranges where we've now photographed the heavens in an extraordinary degree, and we're able then to make the wings to go into all the environments. We can go into all the conditions of all the special environments much more effectively now than they can even. So I want them to think some more about tools. I've given you what I mean by a tool. Now I divide all tools into two main classes. And I find once you discover something important, such as that the discrete alteration of the environment is a tool, and it's something to be employed periodically, then there are relative frequencies of employment. I want to identify that kind of concept. For instance, in designing today a single-family dwelling, the average single-family dwelling, if the architect were to make a drawing of every type of part that goes into the dwelling, you make a nail, he's going to have he has to make 5 drawings. They have 5 different sizes of nails to use, or 10, whatever it is. He may use thousands of that size nail, but I'm talking the types of parts. The numbers of types of parts in a single-family dwelling are always about under 500. That's all the drawings he'd ever have to make. And he reproduced so many of each. Then get to an automobile, get to 5,000 types of parts, and we jumped up now tenfold from 500 to 5,000. This is because the automobile is in motion. The house does not seem to be in motion. And in the house, we try to do 2 things at once. Since we say the hot water pipes and dry your towels. And the housekeeper's sort of proud of anything they can do, use 2 things for anything for 2 things. This is sort of all-purpose thing. They like all purposes. But when you get to the automobile, things are in motion. And this commutator's going around like that, and the wheel's going around like what it is. They're all different frequencies. And when you have 2 things together, fastened together, and one serving 2 completely different functions, and one is functioning 10 times a second, and the other one only operates every minute or 2, then it is an extra weight going along. So when you come to mobile things, you differentiate the relative frequency which they used, and you solve each one for its own frequency, so it is not piggybacking on the other and embarrassing it. So when we come to a beautiful transport plane, we get into sometimes 25,000 types of parts. You get even up to as much as 100,000 types of parts. Some of the extraordinary fighting craft being used now with all the different circuitry. Now, I've made clear why you would have the numbers of types of parts. It is an amazing matter in an airplane that, like the Boeing 747, which flies through the sky. They have a flying speed of 600 miles an hour. The hurricane is 60 miles an hour, so they're flying at 10 times the velocity of a hurricane. If you think of the fury of a hurricane, it is really incredible matter. You really have to lie down when it's really going. You can't lean against that wind. It's going to blow you. The resistance of atmosphere, a moving vehicle, goes up at a second power of the speed. So when you're flying at 10 times the speed of a hurricane, the resistance of the atmosphere is 100. As the ferocity of interaction with a Boeing 747 atmosphere is 100 times the ferocity of a hurricane. It's very hard for people to picture it, but it's so great. And you're going flying like this, and they go through. The captain said, "Better put on fasten seatbelts right now. A little bumpy." Going through a thermal 100 miles an hour going this way, and another thermal beyond it going 100 miles the other way. Shearing actions. The stresses that this thing goes through, 150 tons up there, is equivalent to actually taking the Queen Mary over Niagara Falls and saying it's a little bumpy today. That's quite a piece of engineering. But it is in the hydraulic and pneumatic mediums, so the shock loadings are there. Coming over the rocks of the Niagara Falls, you would feel that. But the point is the stresses are there. Now, the stresses are so great that the design of each rivet in the Boeing 747 more goes into the engineering of one rivet than the whole design of an automobile. I found that society, I know that like a Boeing 747 or the SSD, that they know that's slice ideas on pure, incredible opinions, highly manipulatable by ideologies. For instance, nobody's saying in Russia don't like the supersonic. You go right on with it. And they've been very glad that they've been able to get the Americans to be so stupid and really get into an opinion that say we don't have it. So this has changed their fighting capability enormously. It's been a major psychological warfare game. And so I find the manipulative ability of opinion is terrific. And So in the great ideologies on our planet, all of them go along with, they're based on the ignorance of humanity about principles I talk about, the 99% ignorance regarding technology, where humanity thinks that technology is something new and something threatening, not knowing that the universe is nothing but technology, and all science is to find out what the technology of the universe is, what are the principles. And because you can't, we have all of humans in their ignorance saying there's fundamental inadequacy of life support. It's always been that way. Quite clearly, you have to fight to live. So we have all the ideologies saying, and every economist in the world has a basic model which is fundamental scarcity. So we have all the great ideologies of our Earth saying, you may not like our system, but we have the fairest, most logical way of coping with fundamental inadequacy. So you may not like our side, but you better come over here because we're going to survive. But because there are other people who have other theories, and they seem to be pretty equally strong, we won't know which one is going to be right. So we have trial of arms. So we have the great ideologies of our Earth, all around the Earth, annually appropriating $200 billion a year for complete destruction, taking the highest capability of man, not dollars, highest capabilities of man, the highest performance materials and elements, and designing them how to destroy, almost keeping it going. And the only thing that does keep it going is that ignorance of doing that. Because now we've learned how you can do so very much more with so much less. Anyway, in relation then to that working ideology of all politics, then we'd have them, for instance, saying, obviously, if these people don't have any technology, they're not going to be able to fight, because in the end it's going to be showdown with arms. So with $200 billion a year going into ideology, the capability to destroy, about 20 billion of it goes into psychological warfare, which says if you even stop their technology, they can't obviously have any defense, making it impossible for those people to ever get up any technology. So we find enormous propaganda about it, where because people are 99.9% ignorant about science technology, they're associating technology only with making weapons or only with making money of the few that seem to be advantaged. So it's very easy to develop a very adverse propaganda against technology, I find. But universe is technology. Look at my hand. I'm 80 years of age, and I can pick this thing up, direct this thing to pick that up. Incredible. How your eyes are working, your ears hearing me. How we're getting on. Absolute, pure, beautiful technology, following incredibly elegant, utterly reliable laws, and humanity not knowing so. So I say, if we really, with this metabolical cord has been cut and we begin to really use it, we do have enough here. Nature's trying very hard to get us where we then do not waste any of our time how to get on. We'll automate everything. And you would not have to have a job to get on. It's assumed that if you're born, you're entitled to live. And our job is to see you get the most information possible. And so I'm going to give everybody fellowships to keep school. And every once in a while you may see something that really needs to be attended to in the universe, and you're going to really know how to do it. Because we're here for a completely different function. Anything but the word leisure goes along with the ignorance of being in that, not knowing what it's all about. Just having great leaders telling you what to do. The moment when you're out from under the whip. Now I'm going back to concept then of tools, and I've just made clear what I mean by a tool. They are always frequency modulated. They're related to how frequently they're used. There's something you need pretty badly, but you don't want to carry it around with you, to be encumbered with it. I get to the tools I found in doing thinking. I said if I can get to some clear idea of what I really mean by a tool, then I found I can always make that big clear idea break into two main parts. All the tools can be broken into two main classes. All the tools that can be produced by one human being starting nakedly in the wilderness without any information from anybody else. The kid kicks a stone. You realize he can kick the stone in a preferred direction. He has angular control of his foot and his leg. Then he realizes I can pick up that stone and throw it in a preferred direction. Then he realizes he can knock down an apple with a stone. He finds his arm is longer than he thought it was. Then he learns he can pick up a stick and knock this thing. And he begins to develop spears and bows and arrows, and all the things you find in the great heaps of early artifacts. All the tools can be made by one human being starting nakedly in the wilderness. But because he's so tiny and the earth is so big, he doesn't cover much territory with his little legs in the few years he has to live. And the kind of the resources are very unevenly distributed over Earth, so he's only familiar with the relatively few types of resources for a few types of environmental set of conditions, where it rains, it doesn't rain, where it matters. So I find then contradiction, then I call all the tools can be produced by one human being, starting making the craft tools. And he will make a bowl, he'll make all those things, hollow and carve. He gets up to slings and bows and arrows. But now I have then the other tool, it's the industrial tool, and it's very beautiful because it's all the tools that cannot be produced by one human being. Inherently impossible. It's quite easy to see you couldn't have a great giant dynamo with one person. You couldn't produce a Queen Mary. Now the industrial tool, the first industrial tool which required two human beings was a word. You couldn't have a word without two people. There was no reason for it. It took a great deal of agreement about what it really meant. So with a word, human beings began to compound their experience. Once they could compound their experience, then they began to really build it up about the different environments, the different resources, and very rapidly began. And then they began to write the word, and they got the symbols for that. This is then, the industrial tools represent the sum total of all the experience of all human beings in all history, and the craft tools, just one little guy. And they're beautifully done time and again to make people respect them as the aesthetics of the integrity went in. And often the integrity of the industrial tool is being exploited for the war, the money-making, or the political haymaking. Unfortunately, it's been that exploitation of the tools that has given them an ill repute or made human beings apprehensive about them. But in their right, they are simply a spontaneously cooperative employment of all the information we've all gained all together with all the hardships, all the sacrifices, all the experience, all humanity. So the industrial tool is incredible, its capability. This is what I mean by industrialization. It's so important to be sure, anything you're doing about information, to be sure to differentiate between the exploitability, because my hand is exploitable, but it can be ill-employed to kill. And I find humanity spending $1 million for 10 minutes of a prize fight with people trying to break up their thinking capability. How stupid can you get? Because man was born naked, helpless, ignorant. That's where he starts. We go to where we discover that every once in a while, in mammals, we see wild herd of horses. And there suddenly is a big stallion born. He didn't ask to be big, but he's bigger than the other young stallions. And there's a big king stallion in the herd, and immediately fights this big young stallion. And whichever one wins is the one that is going to inseminate the herd. And that's why nature, as Darwin talked about, the way of developing the capable of surviving. I'm sure amongst human beings born hungry, ignorant, long ago, it was rather big guys born. He didn't ask to be bigger, but he's bigger. So the little guy said, "Mister, you can reach me one of those bananas? I can't reach them." So, and I said, "Mister, there's other people who lost all their bananas. They had a drought, and the whole tribe is coming and wants our bananas. And it's only enough for one of us. Well, you get out, you're a big man, you get out there in front, it's your job." So he gets out in front and he does very well. But continually, he finds himself being continually used in fighting, and he's kind of exploited. His bigness is being exploited all the time. So listen, between those fightings, I got to get some weapons, because I could do much better fighting by having some weapons. And so I got to control things in peacetime to get ready for that. You're continually making me do this. You want me to risk my life, so I'm going to make you've got to let me be king. So he gets to be king. So every once in a while, then another big man is born. I say, "Hey, Mr. King, you got it pretty smooth over there. You're running everything around here. And I'm pretty good, and I think I'll lick you." So he tries, and the king wins, and another big guy tries. So the king said to himself, instinctively, which the power structure automatically, don't let two of those big guys come at me at once. I can handle them fine one by one. I'm superior to them one by one, but together they could really trick me. So he said, I'm not going to kill you. I just licked you, but I'm not going to kill you because I like you around. We go to this warring every once in a while coming around here. And so I'm going to make you Duke of Hill A, and I'm going to make you Duke of Hill B. I want you to get a lot of fighting men. You get your tools ready for that war. We'll go hunting from time to time, and I'll check up on your tools. But don't you ever try to have anybody any go-between. I want you to understand I'm the boss, and you keep yourself separate. No tricks now. So he now has things pretty well organized, getting ready for the wars, and to have their fighting men. They go out and they try it out on the animals, and they automatically reverse this divide and conquer. This is spontaneous, divide and conquer. And to keep conquered, keep divided. This is the law of the power structure. But they reverse this on animals, and they gang up on the animal, one single animal. So they try out their hunting this way, because if you're going to win, then you divide the other guys, and you get one of them at a time and lick him. So he has his power people going there. But every once in a while, one of the little people said, I don't like you, Mr. King, hell with you. I said, you're very disrespectful. And you're going around making a lot of trouble for me. You're stealing my things. I'm going to cut your head off. So the little man says to the king, Mr. King, you made a great mistake, cut my head off. And the king said, you're impertinent too. Better cut that head off in a hurry. And why should I cut your head off? Well, Mr. King, I understand the language of your enemy over the hill, and you don't. I heard what he say he's going to do to you, and how he's going to do it, and when. Well, you got a pretty good idea. That head of yours stays on a little while. And you report to me every day what my enemy is saying over the hill and what he's going to do. And your head stays on, and you're going to do something you never did ever before. You're going to eat regularly. You're going to, right up here at the castle. I'm going to give you a little purple to wear, and I think it'll be pretty hot for you. So you agree to do that, all right? So each person who makes trouble for him, they tell him, well, I understand arithmetic and you don't, Mr. King. That's why I've been able to steal from you and fool you. But I could do arithmetic for you. And so he said, all right. And you can make beautiful instruments. It certainly proves you know metals, and you make better swords than anybody. But you mind your business. You mind your business. You mind your business. I'm only one minds your business. Is that good and clear? So what he does, obviously with the physical people, it makes them physically specialists. As good fighters, whatever it is. And good people to have around, and lots to drink and hunt together. But then all the other anybody has any craft capability or intellectual capability, it makes them all specialists. The way he divides and conquers makes them all specialists. Humanity was inherently, every child is born interested in the whole universe. And the child asks the most beautiful question about the stars and about the microcosm. And the parents say, down and wait till you go to school, they'll tell you about that. Because their parents are all specialized, they can't answer it, because kids are comprehensive. And it's the comprehensive that really counts here. We will get into that in a little bit, which are called synergetics. But I want to hold for the moment how we have specialization. So the whole designing of the educational system is to make every kid special. Everything makes them more and more specialized. They say the scientist gets, he's pretty bright, you see. And he said, Mr. King, I think I can fool you quite a little this way and that way. And he said, I don't want you to bother my stuff here over here at all. I want you to realize that science is really very distinguished. The applied science, that's for the plumber and the blacksmith. Pure science is just absolutely elegant. And I'm going to be sure that you really stay with your science for me and do this pure science. I'm going to give you tenure. You're absolutely guaranteed for life. And even then you get a little discontented. I don't know, Mr. King, what you're doing this thing. It's to really be crying. I'm going to give you a Nobel Prize. So getting more and more specialized, and you just lay eggs, and I decided to do the eggs. Couldn't clear? And I give you Nobel to the second degree now. So this is the way the specialization is maintained. Anyway, that's where we are at today, where this is why 99% of humanity don't understand what's going on in science, because it says just each one specialist talking some esoteric language. Part of our dilemma at the present moment, and the exploitability, and with the ignorance that working stuff not enough to go around, when there is enough to go around, the principles are make it absolutely clear to me, which I'll spend part of my time talking with you about how the technology, the principles are now there, the resources are there to take care of everybody, the highest standing that everybody's ever known. The whole of society is organized on this negative basis. It has to be you and me. And wasting. So we've come out of that womb of permitted ignorance with enormous resources, which by trial now to learn something. And so we're in a very critical moment. We're not here for the muscle, for the strong man. But the muscle is still in control. The guns are still in control. If we come out of that womb with the muscle in control, we should be a stillbirth. We're here for our minds, under the principle, and if we come out with our minds in control, we'll go on to the next chapter, but it'll be a stillbirth if we come out of the muscle. So we're in very great peril because the momentum for the muscle coming out in control is very high. I've said that I felt that humanity has come into a moment of final examination. That metabilical cord was cut by evolution. It was not planned by anybody. Nobody knew that was going to happen that way. That suddenly induced the young world to do its own thinking, to make a cutoff. And that we are coming into some new relation to the universe, which has nothing to do with the traditional, or the memory pattern of exactly what we've experienced before to survive. I try to understand, if I can, how and why we happen to be here with this extraordinary mind. And I would now like to do a little speculating along those lines. I made it clear that the brain is always only coordinating the sensing inputs of all the information from outside us or inside us coming to us. Then being able to recall each special case, and from time to time, human mind discovering relationship existing between the special cases, which can be expressed as a mathematical relationship, like the principle of the leverage. I want to go into the most important classical case of the mind discovering a relationship in a really very big way that has made such a difference between pre-thinking man and today. The case I like to reconsider is in fact, the word reconsider is a beautiful word, consider, bringing stars together, trying to understand the relationship between those stars. That's reconsidering. And we have, historically, the earliest records of human beings. They're aware of there being the bright sun and moon. They're aware of there being a whole array of stars which seem to be in fixed pattern relationships that are constellations. But they're aware of 5 lights in the sky, a little brighter than those other stars, very much smaller than the moon, and that they move around. And the other stars are fixed. They do not stay in the constellations. Those five bright lights begin to know them in a little different color. And the very earliest records of Mesopotamians and Egyptians and Greeks, they're very aware of those what we today call planets. And they kept very good records of them. Many human beings spent their whole lives recording what they did in relation to the seasons. They finally got some pattern and idea. It's really surprising how much they did, in view of the man not having what we call calculating capability. While the Greeks do come in with the geometry and the beautiful logic of the geometry, and while Pythagoras gets to second powering, nonetheless, there was really very poor calculating capability. I just point out too, then, we have the Roman Empire characterizing what we've really known as the most important chapters that we call civilization, and the Roman numerals. And the Roman numerals If you ever tried doing a multiplication or division with Roman numerals, you find you don't get anywhere. And Roman numerals were designed strictly for scorekeeping. You could take a very ignorant slave and say, stand there now, you stand there, and I'm going to give you this scratcher. And every time a sheep goes by, we're going to be driving. Every time one sheep goes by, you make a scratch. And I got to have a supervisor watch you, and every once in a while to make his check mark. So it's called a one-to-one correspondence in mathematics. Now, the Arabic numerals come in to the Mediterranean world, not in Arabia, but in the Mediterranean world, about 700 A.D. 700 years after this sort of zero period of number of prophets of Muhammad and Christ and Buddhas and so forth. There's sort of a 1,000-year period rather between Buddha and the Muhammad and Christ in the middle. But if people doing some new kind of thinking, really, looking for philosophy, some understanding of the universe in a rather big way, and coming to some kind of conclusion, seem to be more or less fairly large acceptance of different areas. Anyway, 700 A.D. and the Arabic numerals are in. But they came in as an idea of a shorthand for the Roman numerals. So instead of make three scratches, you just make a sound like that. It's easier, quicker. I only thought of that way because with the Arabic numerals came the cipher, the cipher. But it was not used at all between 700 and 1200. Just didn't get used. Why? Because you couldn't see no sheep, so you didn't need a symbol for what you couldn't see. And you couldn't eat no sheep, so that you didn't need it. It absolutely, it was out of anything that the experience seemed to require. In 1200 A.D., a man, a Latin in northern Africa, wrote the first treatise on the significance of the cipher. And anybody who is in mathematics and going back exploring mathematics as I have, I think will be prone to agree with me. And I'm completely satisfied that the Arabic numerals came as symbols employed in relation to having first used the abacus. And anybody who's ever used an abacus knows you have a number of rods. It could be wires or bamboo rods, and you have beads sliding on them. And you have some modular number. Maybe it's counting in fours, maybe it's counting in fives. And they have, say, 5 in the column or 4 in the column. And when you finish filling a column with your calculating, you then move one bead down to the next column and clear your column. And it's fresh to use again. You have a means of holding the power. It's like really a computer. It's beginning to memorize previous products. So that you move them to the leftward in the convention of the abacus. Now, and unquestionably, a number, and by virtue of doing this, it's very easy to multiply and divide. So you could do it on the abacus. Now, unquestionably, a navigator after navigator, using his abacus, which they had to have, lost his abacus overboard, or he was crossing the sands and lost it in the river. And he could remember how it worked so well, it's so visual, conceptually. He was able to make a diagram, but instead of making actual pictures, 3 beads, one above the other, he learned to make the number 3. And then when he had an empty column, he had to have a symbol for that, so that's where the cipher came in. Now, all Algorithme explains in his treatise about this in North Africa in 1200 is that this brought about the positioning of numbers. So for your new line of multiplication, you simply start with a 0, and then put in 2 zeros the next, and 3 zeros at the beginning of the line, and then everything is to the leftward of that. So it brought about the positioning of the products, always one more to the left, another column. So this made it possible for anybody to multiply and divide. However, in 1200, the illiteracy was almost 99%. The number of people who could read Algorithme were very few. Gradually, in those days, if you go see all those castellos in Italy, there's lovely green fields, a lovely castello up high, where the the power man made all of his people growing things, bring things into the little town, and he had them go to the priest, and the priest had abacus, or he had a calculating capability, and he calculated how many sheep you give him and how many bags you give him of wheat, and had them leave so many bags of wheat and so many sheep out back of the church. And the temporal power had to then got enough for the church and for himself to make it very worthwhile. They monopolized all calculation. And nothing could have been more important because they had him right in the life support. So it was not very agreeable to them that anybody might be able to do calculating. So that many of the kingdoms of the Mediterranean world had death penalty if anybody caught using the cipher. But one reason or another, it was very difficult, and there was illiteracy in general anyway. So it took about 300 years before the students of northern Italy and southern Germany began to realize and use the cipher regularly. And the student face is younger than the older faces, so they're harder to remember than the older faces. So students can get away with more than the older people. So finally, to make a breakthrough where they can no longer enforce any law against using the cipher. The people use it for 300 years. The secret connotation of a cipher, using a cipher secretly, comes about during that period. But when I first went to school in Milton, Massachusetts, outside of Boston, because I was born in the town, and up to the time I went to I was 7, you're now starting the elementary school through kindergarten. I'd been downtown doing errands for my mother a number of times. So when I got down there, the drugstore man said, have you, and I was going to school now, and I said, have you learned to do your ciphers yet? They didn't say have you learned arithmetic, they called it doing your ciphers. It's amazing how the expression has gone out just in my lifetime. It was a key to calculating. Now, by 1500, 300 years, suddenly the capability to calculate is so available that we have Copernicus with calculating capability, calculating the motions of these planets mathematically, doing some recording, integrating the information they had about all of them, and discovering we were on a planet ourselves, that we were going around the sun. And up to this time, it's sort of just the other way, the whole universe going around us. This extraordinarily excited Tycho Brahe. Tycho Brahe was a man of great wealth, and he said we need much better telescopes to make much more keener observations. And so he expended his great wealth in getting them, and Kepler used the instruments and made very, very accurate observations of the behaviors of those planets. Kepler then, with his beautiful information, found they were all different sizes. They're all going around the sun at different rates. They were all different distances from the sun. Everything was disorderly. They were on the same team, apparently, going around the sun, but everything's disorderly. And the point was that he also then found they're moving in ellipses and not in circular orbits. Now, if you ever made your own ellipse, you make a circle with a string and a pen and a pencil, fixed pen, and you have a single restraint. If you want to make ellipse, you have 2 restraints. So if you have a major ellipse, you know what you're talking about, as Kepler had. Then he knew something's really going on up here, very extraordinary, to do with restraints. But he said because they are all superficially disorderly, they have one thing in common: they're all going around the sun. I'd like to find something else in common. So as a mathematician, I can give them something else in common absolutely arbitrarily. There's something you can do like that. For instance, you have any triangle, and you'd like to know something about it, so you drop it perpendicular from one corner to opposite face. Now you have now you've got 2 right triangles in there. You got 2 triangles each to the right. So you're giving one known. So you found out something else, and you get into business pretty quickly. Now, he wanted to give them something arbitrary in common. So he gave them a small amount of time, exactly the same amount of time, 21 days, of so many hours, minutes, and seconds. And that was too short for any orbit factor. It's a very short amount of any orbit, so a small arc, an elliptical arc. So he knew exactly at the starting point where this planet was and exactly how far it went in 21 days, so many minutes and seconds. Cut off, bing. It is now such a distance from the sun because it's moving elliptically, so a little different radius. Very close. So he has a piece of pie shape. It's a distance from the sun and it starts, little arc, and then the line back to the sun again. Here's a diagram. He's got some short, fat pieces of pie and some long, thin pieces of pie. But because he now had all the data, oh, I said that there's no pieces of pie up in the sky there. But I might as well calculate the areas. I can do that because I got the data. So he calculated all the areas. And supposing you're the first human being to do that, you have the data and it's good and accurate, and found out what Kepler did. He found that in this same amount of time, the areas were not something pretty close. They were exactly the same area, exactly the same area. Hidden in all this superficial disorder with exact coordination going on. And this one particular phenomenon, area swept out, absolutely the same. Hidden. So he said, they're coordinating in an incredibly elegant manner. If they were touching each other like gears, I can understand how they would rotate one another. But how they're incredible distances apart. How can they coordinate at those distances? They said, one thing I know about, I've got a weight on a string, I swing it around my head. It goes in orbit. If I let go, it goes off in a line. The fact they're going in orbits means there's some kind of restraint like that string. It's a pull relationship, not a push. Gears would be pushing. And the fact that they're going in ellipses means, I know they're being pulled by the sun because they're going around it, that's the string. But they're being moved. So I see that they are getting into clusters from time to time. Maybe they're affected by their own clustering. Maybe they're pulling themselves. Then we have Galileo with calculating capabilities suddenly available. I'm assuming all the time the same beautiful minds, but didn't have the ability, didn't have the tool. And an incredible tool calculating was. And because in with it comes a Galileo, in comes a Leonardo, all the really extraordinary characters suddenly appear. All came in with his calculating capability. Now, Galileo, had, like any human being, has seen things falling for a long time, but didn't have a way to calculate about it. So something's going on there, but he can't do anything about it. But he now had it, and he started having objects going down inclined planes of various angles, steeper and steeper, then free falling. Finding rates of change corresponding, and finally free falling. They found the free falling body was accelerating in its rate of falling. In a sense, every child knew that, because if a child climbs a little higher and lets go, it hurts his legs a little more each time. Otherwise, he's hitting the ground harder. So it was intuitive that it was going on, but you couldn't prove it till he had beautiful calculating capability. I was able to calculate and found that they were not only accelerating, but as you halve the distance, you increase the velocity fourfold, or vice versa. The interactiveness apparently was increasing fourfold. So the attractiveness of the Earth is pulling. And this he correlates this with thinking about what Kepler's found out. There's some kind of a pull thing. The Earth is pulling. Then we have Isaac Newton, very excited by all those people. Copernicus, all of them. And he was deeply eager to find out what this pull was. At that time, it said that there was great competition going on between who was going to run the world with the ships of the sea. And they saw the science was finding out some very important things, and so the science was getting some backing. And we have Galileo in Italy and Isaac Newton in England, and Galileo said he had some laws of motion, and England had to have some laws of motion. So Mr. Newton gets into it too, but he's a brilliant man. He was greatly advantaged by the fact that two or three important a priori accomplishments of humanity. One is that they had already coordinated the pulsations, the tides of our Earth. 3/4 of the Earth covered with water, and the quadrillions of tons of water being pulled daily by the relation to the moon positions. So the moons and the tides are correlated, and they said, Newton said, my muscles couldn't lift that kind of billions, quadrillions of tons of water. The pull between these just two, moon and Earth, must be something very great, and let alone these other things may be bigger. And he said, I can see that the pull must be something to do with the relative size, the relative mass. He said, if I swing a weight around my head, string, and let go, I send off a line like that. Earth takes right over, makes it pull it that way. Contradicts me. So he got up his first law of motion, which was the body would persist in a straight line except as affected by other bodies. He said, I can see that the pull of the earth is so enormous that even though two apples might have a pull from one another, it is so infinitesimal they wouldn't demonstrate but being overwhelmed by the pull of the earth. Because if you take the mass of an apple versus the mass of the earth, and you can't calculate it, so it wouldn't be imperceptible. So he said you'd only be able to witness this kind of thing going on celestially. Would not be provable in the kind of proximity we are to the earth. Now, he then said, he also was advantaged by the fact that astronomers had by this time very beautiful, complete cataloging of the what we'd call the fixed stars of the spherical ray, all the constellations, and beautiful calculations of the rotation of the Earth around the Sun, and the attitudes the Earth took during that year, and then had at any one point on the Earth, reading above the horizon with an angle measuring device we call a sextant, or whatever they used at that time for the angle measuring. You could, if you knew the time and what the attitude of the Earth was in that array, you'd find out just where you are on that planet. Or if you knew where you are, you could find out the other things and so forth. Isaac Newton, with all this information and excitation, said, okay, if the Earth were to let go of the moon, like a string, it would go off in a line. Like I have a weight and let go of it, it goes off in a line. He said, I'm going to have a hypothetical severing of whatever this tension is between the moon and the Earth. And so it picks a particular evening when the moon is going to be in the full and highly observable from the point where he is on the Earth. And said, then he figures at that moment, because the moon is going around the Earth in a given kind of pattern, how it would go off in a tangent to that plane. He figured what that line would look like as against the array of the sky at that moment and that night. So he had his theoretical line there, all right. And on that night, at that time, then measured the rate at which the moon was falling away from that line towards the Earth. Because he said the Earth is already in motion around the Sun at 60,000 miles an hour, so the moon is falling into it, but he doesn't catch up to it. And because he was able to figure those speeds of which of doing that plus the speed of the Earth around the Sun, and he found that the rate at which the moon was falling towards the Earth was being governed exactly by Galileo's law, which was to do with the second power, multiplying the number of times itself when you halve the distance. You got 4 times the power. So Isaac Newton then evolved his hypothesis that if you halve the distance between the two bodies, you increase the interattractiveness 4-fold. Or if you double the distance away, you reduce the interattractiveness to 1/4 what it was. So he spoke about this being the inverse ratio of the second power. At the time he said that, 99% of humanity were illiterate anyway, and what the inverse ratio of the second power didn't mean anything to any world at all. To a few scientists it did, astronomers. They then used his information, his hypothetical concept, and sure enough it explained all the celestial behaviors. Whether any group behaviors is always absolutely explained. So he discovered what we call a generalized law in science. It had no exception ever to it. All right. Here's his law without exception of the mass interaction of bodies. And long after Newton, when he got into the microcosm that we didn't know we were going to get into, where there's no electromagnetics involved, the same mass attraction laws are holding it. He discovered then a principle, and the principle to be qualified as a generalized principle, it must have no exceptions, no even suggestion there could be exception. So a principle is inherently eternal. And because the brain is always and only dealing in the special cases, and all the special cases are inherently terminal, brain asks man to explain things in the universe begins and ends. So he has the word eternal is not in the language of the brain, and was not really a very acceptable word to just the brain operating people. But mind had discovered eternal principles. Now, this is a very extraordinary matter. We're into something quite. This is purely metaphysics, absolute metaphysics. Where then there was nothing in the geometry or the chemistry of the moon that said it was going to attract another body. There was nothing in the chemistry, geometry of Earth that said it's going to attract another body. It was only because for thousands of years they'd seen something is going on and keeping at it, they suddenly found out what was going on. But she said, hey, Mr. Newton, now, what is your gravity? He said, I can't possibly tell you. I know I can understand what the relationship is. Now, that's what I found. I found a relationship that exists that is not in any of the bodies by themselves. Quite clearly so, in that if when I change the distance arithmetically, the rate of interaction is changing exponentially. That's a different mathematical rate. Not in either of them. So here we have, this is what human mind discovers, relationships going on between that are not of. So you say to Mr. Newton, what is it? He says, I can't tell you because there's nothing to point to in any of the bodies, special cases. Which then, if you come to the beginnings of science, you come to a priori complete mystery. You don't know why it is so, but this elegant reliability is there. Such as Kepler's finding, all found by it. That's why Einstein wrote a very beautiful piece in the New York Times Sunday magazine in 1930, which he gave the name Cosmic Religious Sense. And he wrote about the non-anthropomorphic concept of God. And said, what a faith in the orderliness of universe must have inspired Kepler to be able to spend all the nights of his life alone with the stars. This orderliness. He said, I think these are the men who were called the greatest heretics by the church were the most, by far, much more inspired by faith than anybody in the church. Now, this is a great turning moment, really. This is the beauty of that man Einstein. Now, I would mainly want you to understand and can't understand the difference between the brain and the mind. It's always a relationship existing between that is not of any of the special cases themselves. Once you have learned what the principle is, you can then employ it. Incidentally, I'm going to give you a small detour for a minute. Got it. Very few people paid any attention to what Newton really discovered. They were taught in school, inverse ratio, and they just say it, and because they'd learned a formula that did explain things. We have in the 20s, after World War I, technology coming in a big way, enormous numbers of engineers being trained, science being already mass-produced. And we get in Russia where the ideologists were up against religions, which were seemingly more powerful than ideologies, so they really were anti-religious, and they were very much committed to trying to break down religions by making it clear that science seemed to make it clear that anything, that man could calculate anything. Therefore, it came to atheism. You didn't need anything because man had this calculation. There was an enormous false confidence, and this all you have to know is the formula. So this is what you're teaching kids, not how Newton found it. You told them about his formula. Nobody took the trouble to take Newton. What went on that I've given you here today? When you get to the real events that took place, you come to a priori absolute mystery. Again, amongst the metabiblical cord cuttings of the young world, not being told, never mind what you think, get tough, so forth, where the young world then finally it had to do its own thinking, because quite clearly to them that their parents were not doing the thinking. And that young world doing its own thinking is again rediscovering the mystery, because they're doing their own thinking. And find an enormous commitment of that young world to realizing the a priori mystery, where the older world is saying, we know what it's all about, and the kids say, you don't know what it's all about. This is a very important new aspect of their doing their thinking. Now, but you are discovering when you do your thinking and do go to experiment, then you find the enormous reliability of these principles are there, that you can get on with the universe. It's a very new relationship. And the kids are discovering that, and they're having more and more confidence in it. But I want you to realize how terribly they were exploited in the Cold War, with 200 billion a year, 20 billion going to psychological warfare, getting into psycho-guerrilla warfare, to deliberately going out with narcotics and pushing to kill all the kids in the other countries. And nothing has ever been more cruelly undertaken, thoughtlessly undertaken humanity. And say, break down the kids' confidence and knowledge, break down everything. The consequence is that really the kids went through it, and now they developed an antibody, and they're not getting caught by this at all. Their idealism was incredibly exploited, and they realize this. So they are really doing their thinking now, and they're all very wary of every attempt to exploit them. They have no use for any of the politics anyway. They used to be able to take sides, but no, they're no use for any sides. They say all politics is to them utterly corrupt. And we're don't need any great leader anymore. We have a new condition coming where it used to be just a pharaoh and his grand vizier, and then there's the nobles and their grand viziers. Then there's the rich and noble middle class, which goes on for 2,000 years out through Victorian suddenly. But that was only 1% of humanity, less than 1%. So now that you have the great majority of humanity coming in the picture, all the kids, all of them literate, all talking information around the world, none of the very little misinformation I was born with, and enormous amount of the reliable information on their own. So we have an entirely new base of all humanities, and they don't need some leader. You don't need your sailors in a boat. You don't need somebody to tell you what to do when the storm comes on. Boy, you do it such spontaneous coordination. You really gear to one another. That's where the young world is going to carry on. It's going to be completely different. So they have no use for the political picture. Utterly corrupt. I want you to try to sense with me the big things that are going on here, and yet the beautiful mystery that comes with it, because that sensitivity, realizing it's a priori mystery anyway. We're pretty tiny in here. We have this little capability. I found I have a kid guarding his tenderness and realizing stones don't love stones, and this pretty extraordinary stuff this love, and they go right along with it. It's beautiful. Now, I'd like to go on some more about the significance of the human beings having this minds and ability to discover generalized principles. Again, having been made such specialists, we find the specialists rarely find generalized principles anymore because they get too special. It's all a special case rather than general. You have to really be across the board to get a chance to discover the principles, to feel the different inputs that Newton could feel there by many. We used to have what we call natural philosophers, and the scientist was really natural philosophy. He was not only a scientist, but he was really thinking about the significance of what he's finding in terms of total humanity and its total needs. That's been all cut out, these hard lines of this specialization. I don't think that the power structure is deliberately carrying on the specialization for this reason anymore, nor the politics of any of them. But they inherited it, and it works great for them, so they just tend to go along with it. I don't ascribe any malevolence to anybody. I don't have any good or bad people. So coming back to the human beings and having mind and discovering principles and looking at those principles themselves, instead of being a specialist, I'm going to look at how many of the generalized principles do we know anything about. And what I find, we have a really small family of these generalized principles so far. At no time did we know we were going to discover one before we did discover it. It came as a really tremendous surprise. And we never know the last one discovered is the last one. We just have the family so far discovered. But we have enough of them to be able to really look at them as a whole. Now, when I spoke about relationship existing between that is not of, and the special case by themselves, this is what I mean by synergy. Behaviors of systems, unpredicted by behaviors, any of the parts of the system when considered only separately. Very sharp definition. So all the great generalized principles are synergetic. The universe is operating synergetically. Now, I want to look at those laws as a group. I find first and most important is none of them has ever been found to contradict any of the others. all being eternal, they're all concurrently operative and non-contradicting any of the others. When human beings use the expression design in contradistinction to randomness or disorder, they mean that the parts are deliberately arranged in relation to one another. The fact we find these laws all interaccommodating deliberately in very orderly ways, I would say we are discovering gradually a little bit of the great design of the universe. That human beings are allowed to enter in such a extraordinary condition of advantage, then more than begins to single us out from everything else we know, and that we also had found ourselves to be partly sort of miniature universes having a chemical, relative abundance of chemical elements and things like that, and numbers of generalized principles are all in us that when we externalize them, these various tools, they're all originally integral.
Well, then there is such a thing as bad synergy.
No?
Politics.
No, I think nature has its checks and balances. So I don't use the word good and bad. So I want to see what she's doing. She has gestation rates. She has no instant babies. And politics is an educational system. And if your learning doesn't work, that's the greatest thing you can learn. That doesn't mean you're learning less, you're learning more. Oh. So here's this great design that we're beginning to learn something about, synergy. And I would like to, and the human mind then is synergetic. I'll point out that there's nothing in the atoms per se that predict chemical compounds. It's the same business that mass attraction would say, whatever it is. There's nothing per se that says it's going to attract. Not to see plurality that you realize in the team is a behavior, as a between us, not by themselves, never. So nothing in the atoms per se predict chemical compounds. Nothing in chemical compounds per se predicts biological protoplasm. There's nothing in biological protoplasm per se predicts camel and palm tree and the respiratory exchange of gases between the mammal and the botanical. I find the larger is never being explained by the lesser. On the other hand, there are extraordinary strategies in education where if you learn about something about the whole and some of the parts, you find out about the rest of the parts. I spoke about the law of the triangle. You know that some of the angles are 180 degrees. If you know one is 90, then get down to two of them are sharing the other 90ness. So they're going to be co-varying, and out of this came trigonometry, etc. Now, we found, because we found that the edges were varying proportionally and so forth. I'd call it the Greek triangle, 180 degrees and so forth, beginning of a synergetic strategy of dealing with the whole, known whole, and some of the parts finding out about the other parts. I know the whole, and I've got two sides and an occluded angle, two angles, occluded side, and I find out about there's only three parts in the triangle. I know three, and I find out about the other three. And if I know two of them, I can get the third by introducing a 90-degree angle by the perpendicular. So give me two, and I'll find out about the other four. So Euler comes into the picture. Euler introduced into mathematics something called topology, and that doesn't come in until a little over 100 years ago, and is considered the largest important new branch of mathematics in the history of mathematics. And what he did was to say that all our visual experiences are reducible to three fundamental aspects, not to be confused one with the other. We have trajectories or lines. Where two lines cross, you get a vertex crossing. And where we have the line coming back and so a parallel line, you get areas. And areas are the opposite of say, of points or fixes and lines. So then he said, dealing in a polyhedron, that the numbers of the vertexes plus the numbers of areas are always equal to the numbers of the lines plus the number 2. And you just do that check quickly. A cube has 8 vertexes, 8 corners, has 6 faces, So 8 plus 6 is 14, equal to the 12 edges plus the number 2, 14. Tetrahedron, 4 vertexes plus 4 faces, 8, equals the 6 edges plus the number 2. And so it goes. And so here was the behavior of the whole, and known behavior of some of the parts found out by other parts. Then Willard Gibbs comes along in the early 20th century, and became really the one scientist who they felt came into World War II and came out of World War II pretty whole, and he developed what he called the phase rule. And Willard Gibbs, whereas Euler was dealing with visual aspects, Willard Gibbs was dealing with tactile. He was dealing with liquids, crystallines, and gases that I spoke to you about. And it turns out that their laws of associating, dissociating, to go from one state into another, the dominance of any one of them, was exactly the same law, really, as the Euler law. This plus this equals this plus the number 2. So here were two grand strategies for dealing with wholes and something about parts, and you found out about other parts. They're called these synergetic strategies. So I made up my mind then, here, if you say a law of synergy then, not only the behavior of the whole not predicted by parts considered separately, but the known behavior of the whole and known behavior of parts, you can find out about other parts. You call that a synergetic strategy. So I said, all right, if I'm going to really try to understand something about our universe, in as much as the lesser parts never explain, I might as well start with the universe itself. So I had, all right, if you're going to start with the universe, you've got to have an experiential definition of universe. I found two beautiful definitions of science, one by Sir James Jeans. James said, science is the attempt to set in order the facts of experience. So you start with experience as the raw material and you try to find order. Some basic, look at those relationships, interrelationships. We have Ernst Mach, M-A-C-H, the Viennese physicist. And he says physics is the attempt to set experience most economical order. He introduces the word economical because physics finds that nature is always most economical. The general scientist could, like there's a mathematician, Boole, and Boole found that when you couldn't find some logical solution, you could go to the most absurd. Then you've got a little less absurd, and you may get to find out what is fairly reasonable. At least run your answer to some kind of a corner. So we could be a Boolean scientist and deliberately not be most economical, be most uneconomical working to. But we have the physicists and deliberately saying physics is the attempt to set experience in the most economical order. So both the non-physicists and the physicist scientists are dealing with raw material that's experience, and they're looking for order. And Einstein then said in the beginning and the end is experience. The raw material of all science is experience. And it's very different then from the mathematics, which doesn't do that. They have it start with axioms, where they make misconceptions such as, say, plurality of lines can go through the same point at the same time. All mathematics does that. Euclidean and non-Euclidean, hyperbolic, all of them. And physics says you cannot do that. A line is an event, it's an action. And if there's an energy event already taking place here and another energy impinges on it, you have either a smash up or a reflection, a refraction, or a critical huddle. But all the things you and I experience of reflection or refraction is because lines can't go to the same point at the same time. That's what goes on in the cloud chamber. Then the mathematicians carry on with that kind of nonsense. So when I mean experiential basis, I've got to go on what we really know about experience, right? So I want an experiential definition of universe. So my experiential definition of universe is, by universe I mean the aggregate of all the humanities consciously apprehended and communicated experiences. That's all we're talking about. Now I've said consciously apprehended and communicated. Communication can be yourself or to others. You put it down on paper as communication. I've had many people say, I think you left something out. You must have left something out. I said, well, my experience includes dreaming. My includes experience that people tell lies, which means they take furniture but rearrange the furniture ways it's never been used before. But And experience demonstrates that every day I learn more. The dictionary always grows. So there's always a becoming. And if you can tell me anything I've left out, then it's going to be part of the experience. So that I'm perfectly happy. I've never had anybody throw me out off base about this now. That my definition of universe seems to be holding up now. Einstein decided to define physical universe. He'd said what was physical, what was metaphysical. He was dealing with all the things that move needles, electromagnetically or gravitationally. And he said, then he found that with the speed of light, there was a non-instantaneous universe, non-simultaneous universe. Newtonianly, they had thought, they didn't know there was a speed of light, so assumed instant universe. Open your eyes, there's the stars. They're always there. Einstein then comes into learning the speed of light, and such as I gave you that Powell star 680 years ago, light just came to us. And he said, universe is an aggregate of non-simultaneous events. And each one of them is energetic, and their energies last so long, so they're an aggregate of non-simultaneous, only partially overlapping energy events, energy transformations. Also, then he said, we've discovered the photon. We got energy as a package. Energy is in finite packages. I personally add something in here that he doesn't say. I call it scenario universe. Scenario universe, where one frame of the scenario doesn't tell you the big story, where one picture of a caterpillar doesn't tell it's going to be a butterfly. Nor does one picture of a butterfly tell you the butterfly can fly. It takes many. And we take an enormous number of the pictures of the butterfly before we begin to learn how it can fly, what the principle of flight. So to get any meaning out of these things, you need an enormous amount before we get this relationship existing between the not of, and because the frames are all special cases. And the big show is the interrelationship, the synergetics of it. This is scenario. So scenario universe has no inherent beginning or ending. So anybody who says, I wonder what's outside is going back to simultaneous universe, non-scenario. It's like saying, which word is the dictionary to say, wonder what's outside? It has no meaning. The question is an ignorant question. Like, for instance, some of these very bright lights showing a tendency. Maybe really our tailpipe. We've been around thousands of times just looking up your own tailpipe. Go around. So you get the concentrated overlay of all the times you're going around. And right, I liked Einstein's definition of the physical universe. He said because energy packages are all finite, therefore an aggregate of finites is finite. So while this is non-unitarily conceptual, it is finite. I said I'm going to add my metaphysical, because he don't include the physical. So I said, I find all the metaphysical experiences begin and end. They're packaged. And so they are finite. But I got into then saying that total universe, I gave you a system, and the system was subdividing all the universes outside the system, all the universes inside the system, a little bit of the universe, which is the system that does the dividing. That's the one that's the one you think about, the constellation of those particular lights you're interested in, that particular frequency and magnitude. So I saw that the system is inherently finite. They did this dividing, and I then began to find some very extraordinary things. As for instance, the Greek definition of a sphere was a surface equidistant in all directions from a point. Which is to say that there could be no holes in the sphere, because you came to the rim of the hole, the radius would change. So as defined, it would be complete separation of the insiderness from the outsiderness. And because there are no holes in it, it would defy the second law of thermodynamics. It could not lose any energy because there are no holes to lose energy. We found so as defined, it was the first perpetual motion machine because you throw away the rest of the universe outside the sphere, and the sphere as inside was eternal because there's no traffic between them. Now physics had found no continuums. Physics had found no solids. She really actually only found frequencies. Right. I had to redefine the sphere in the terms of experiential physics today. I said, by the spheric experience is an aggregate of events, approximately equidistant, approximately all directions from one approximate event. By the actual time to measure that, then so much other time gone by, the other one may be out of gear. You don't know that. You could not make simultaneous measurement. We have here an aggregate of events, and each event, then, and nature is always most economical. Between 2 points on an arc, the distance of the arc versus the chord between those points, arc is longer. Nature is always most economical. So I said, this very high spheric grouping, nature will have the connection to the chordal and not the arc. The middle of a chord is always nearer the center of the circle than at the ends of it. So chords emerge to impinge on the sphere. And as they emerge, they're coming in at an angle less than 180 degrees. So they, as viewed on the inside, they're always concave, always viewed on the convex on the outside. The mathematician made again one of those mistakes of saying, for an infinitesimal moment, a sphere is congruent with the plane to which it is tangent. In other words, 180 degrees around every point. So all spherical trigonometry has always been done 180 degrees around every point. And this turns out not to be true. So I found that I got my geodesic spheres, I simply had high and high frequency geodesics, very, very multiple. And I found the sums of the angles around every vertex was always something less than 360 degrees. But if I took the number of vertexes of a system times 360 degrees, multiply that out, and from that I would subtract 720 degrees, that would be the sums of the angles around all the vertexes of any system, whether it was a crocodile, irregular or regular like the sphere. So the mathematics was wrong in assuming this. Now 720 degrees is very interesting because that's the sums of the angles around all the vertexes in one tetrahedron. So I saw that the difference between a system returns upon itself. I have a flat sheet of paper that seems to go to infinity. I cut out some angles and make it conic here and conic there. Finally get all the edges coming back together. When it finally is all together like the skin of a pig or whatever it may be, you always have taken out 720 degrees. The difference between seeming infinity, plane going 360 degrees to infinity, and a system is always 720 degrees, which is one tetrahedron. So I find there's a positive and negative. There's an interior tetrahedron between the microcosmic, and there's a convex and a concave tetrahedron. So I find then I have a finite universe, which is non-unitarily conceptual. Conceptual is the thinkable, that you can think about the system, but the difference between the conceptual and the finite but non-conceptual universe is one positive, one negative tetrahedron. I'm including both the metaphysical and the physical, and I have now a way of defining universe that is finite, both metaphysical and physical, and I find the difference between what man used to call infinite, I call finite, but what he used to call finite, I call definable. So the difference between the finite but non-conceptual and the definable, which is conceptual, is always one positive and one negative tetrahedron. So now I have a very powerful way, because I deal with total universe, and I begin to then zero in quite rapidly when you get into 20 questions and say what is irrelevant, and get in really very rapidly what it is I'm dealing with and come out finitely. So I have a synergetic capability. But I find also then, if I think about one system, as I get higher and higher frequency tetrahedra, the simplest sphere would be a tetrahedron with 4 points. I have an aggregate events which have insiders, outsiders, so the simplest would be this. Then as I get higher and higher frequency subdivision, the chords are always between the spherical points. So I get then very high frequency spherical tetrahedron or octahedron or icosahedron. They're only three structural systems in the universe. And so what we see as the spheres is high frequency tetrahedron, octahedron, icosahedron. Wow. And in fact, they're all the same creature. They're all built on the tetrahedron. I found another extraordinary thing, that the sums of the angles around all the vertex of any system, say it's a crocodile, wherever it may be, you get a very high number of systems. And the sums of the angles around all the vertex of any system is always equally divisible by 720 degrees. As everything gets down to the tetrahedron. The tetrahedron, then, we found was the simplest system in the universe. I take tubes and have them strung together with a dacron cord, making a long necklace. And they make polygons. Like I can drape them over my shoulders, or I can lay them out flat on the ground and call them a polygon. And I find they're very, very flexible. So I keep taking out tubes. I finally get down to 4, completely flexible. Get down to one more out, and I only have 3 sides. You can't have a polygon of less than 3 sides. I'm in the terminal case, and this is the first time it doesn't flex. It's a triangle. And we find that what I mean by triangle is a complex of events that interact with one another to produce a stable pattern. We have 3 tubes and 3 flexible corners, absolutely independent from one another. We have 6 components interacting to produce a stable pattern. So we could say the triangle was the minimum polygon. It's a terminal case, the only stable one. And the more sides I have, the more flexible it gets. So I got nature absolutely here where she's telling me something, that the triangle is structure is triangle, there are no others. So I now have that triangle means structure. Found tetrahedron was a minimum system in the universe and consists of 4 triangles. So it's a minimum structural system in the universe. In quantum mechanics today, and in the most recent viewpoints of astrophysics, where we say then the physicists, they never could have been an a priori disorder because of the a priori always known coexisting proton and neutron in an absolutely orderly relationship. And each one having 2 side energy effects. Whereas engineering used to say every action has a reaction, they used to say equal and opposite reaction, 180 degrees. We find that reactions are not that way. Just the thrust of the engine goes out as 90 degrees precessional. And when I have a vector, since we have speed of light, every action not only has a reaction, but it has a resultant which is not the same as the reaction. They're not simultaneous. So we found every energy event is 3 vectors: the event, reaction, and resultant, and they're not at 180 degrees. Take a piece of paper, and you make yourself, draw yourself a W. Now I want you to draw a line across the heads of the W, and a line at the bottom. I'm going to give you 3 triangles. I want you to cut those out, paper. I want you to bend on the interior W lines. So you've got 3 triangles, and you bring it's going to read A, B, C at the top, D, E on the bottom. It's got A, D on one edge, C, E on the other edge. I want you to bring a C, E to A, D. Now you get a tent with 3 triangles. It's got a triangular base. You put 1 triangle plus 2 triangles equals 4 triangles. Not 3. This is synergy. Now, triangle is always waiting there. You'll always come out with 4. You can't come out with 3. There's no 3 does not exist in the universe. We have 4 or none, and 4 always has 6 interrelationships. Now, I find when I have closest packing spheres, unit radius spheres. Think about it. I'm a sphere, and I've got a radius. And as far as I know, I don't know anything about the universe because there's nothing else to look at. There's no awareness, no otherness, no awareness. I suddenly got aware there's another sphere in this universe. So I have my first awareness. and we're mass attracted to one another in the same time sphere. We start rolling around on each other, touch each other. You can't get into each other. You just keep rolling around each other. And any kind of rolling is permitted. And suddenly we realize there's another sphere over there, and it gets mass attracted to two of us, and touches one of our spheres and rolls around, then rolls in the valley between the other two. And suddenly there's a triangle. Now each one of the spheres is touching two other spheres. And no longer can they roll around because you found, I told you, even gears, you can reciprocate three odd numbers you can't. So three of them. And if two of them want to go this way, the other one jams them. But each one is touching two others, not on the axis, but each one is touching two others eccentrically. And if one of them starts then to roll towards the top, all three of them, the friction will make them all, they'll involute at the top and evolute at the bottom like a rubber donut. So it's still permitted in motion, but only involution or evolution. Very much like the field pattern you get in magnetics, magnetic field. So now a fourth ball appears in the universe. And it gets a mass attraction, it touches one, rolls on it, rolls in the valley between two, and then rolls in the valley between all three. There's a dimple there. And suddenly it blocks the involution or evolution. And it's a tetrahedron. It's stable again. Really nice to feel it that way. Now, I've got then the pattern you get with spheres in closest packing, triangulation. And incidentally, if I take four spheres on a plane the same size, and put them in the corners of a square, they're unstable because there's a distance between two diagonals. And they can go this way and become a diamond, where these two touch each other, or they can go two different diamonds. And when you do the altitude with the same base, the altitude comes less. So the diamond has less area than do the square. So the square is never closest packing. They're always omnitriangulated. So diamond would be two triangles, two equilateral triangles. Now, you're looking at a hexagon, and you've got 6 equilateral triangles around a common point. I can have 6 spheres tangent around a common sphere. So I get 6 triangles. Can you see that? And you find there's 6 around one, while there's 6 nests. If you had a sphere full, then one of it overlaps the next nest. So you can only get 3 to sit on the top at any one time and 3 on the bottom. You get 12 in closest packing round one, and makes 4 planes. Equatorial plane of 6, equatorial plane of 6 like this. It makes 8 tetrahedra and a 6 square or half octahedra. This is 12 around one. This is fundamental nucleus. You don't get any fundamental nucleus in cubes. But in the vector equilibrium, we call it where all the radii are equal in length to all the chords. Think about that hexagon. You have 6 radii going like that, coming apart, and 6 chords. They're equal length. They're vectors. So they're the same energy value, but the 6 are exploding, are coming apart or disintegrating from one another. They only will fasten each other at one end, and they're let going of that. But the 6 around are fastened to each other at both ends, and they close back in themselves, so the same energy value is more effectively arranged, and this is the gravitational binding of our universe embracement against the radiational. So the gravitation maintains the constant integrity of our eternally returning universe. So that what we call the vector equilibrium, we have this 12 spheres close packed around one. We have all the radii going outwardly at the same magnitude as all the chords, so that we have the embracement of the universe more effectively arranged. So now I have 12 spheres close packed around one. Now I try putting another layer, and find I get 42 in the next layer. Same triangles. Instead of having one sphere, you had 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 in a triangle. There's 42 in the outer layer. If I make another layer, I get 92. The next layer has 162. The next layer, 252. They always end in the number 2. I found that fascinating. So I found that there was in each layer 2 to act as the axis of spin, because every system has spinability, and every system does spin. Now, so the 2 to act as the spinability. In addition to it, there were then, if I took away the 2 from every layer, instead of reading 12, it read 10. Instead of reading 40, it was 42, it was 40. Instead of 92, it was 90. So I saw each one of these, 10, 40, 90, 162, 150, were divisible by 10. So I divide them by 10. So I have numbers of 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, which is what we call progression of the second power. 1 to the second power, 2 to the second power is 4, 3 to the second power is 9, 4 to the power is 16, 5 to the second power is 25. So the numbers of balls out there was always what we call frequency of the system to the second power times 10 plus the number 2. I was able to really say, now this became very exciting for the following reason, that we now have identified second powering as the rate of growth of the exterior shell. But it is not continuous surface. Man has always identified second powering with the surface before. Third powering with volume, first powering with line. So suddenly, second powering is not the surface, but the number of energy units in the outer shell. And we found Einstein's E equals mc to the second power, c to the second power, speed of light to the second power. So his radiation constant was second powering. But it was identified with energy packages, not with continuous surface. So now we've identified that second powering. We have 2 separated out to act as poles of the system, and still conserving the second powering for the rate of growth of the non-polars. This allows me to have 2 poles that do not move 4-dimensionally. The pole can be isolated while the rest of the system moves around it. Now, this became very exciting to me, and I saw that Euler's +2 had to do with it. He never thought, though he was a very great man, and not only did he develop his topology, but he also developed the mathematics of structural analysis. He recognized that every structural unit always has as a neutral axis of spin, but he never identified the two-ness with the terminals of that axis for some strange reason, even though he had it in his formula. So I now identified it specifically with being then the terminal of it. Next thing, then, I saw that inasmuch as the number of balls in every layer was frequency second power times 10 plus 2, incidentally, when the virologists, at the time of the DNA, RNA, came to the discovery that they were making X-ray diffraction photographs of the protein shells of the viruses within which the DNA, RNA developed. They found that the numbers of points in it seemed to be turning out to be my number as frequency second power times 10 plus 2, and they wrote me about this from university in England, and began to verify it. So they had a world meeting of virologists, and they, just before the old Herald Tribune stopped, and they published front page my finding of this. Now this rate of spheres then closer to packing grow this way. Atoms pack and the way they grow around a common nucleus. It's a basic nuclear arrangement. So now then, my frequency second power, the first layer was 12, which is frequency is 1 layer, and 1 to the second power is 1 times 10 is 10 plus number 2, so there were 12 balls. So I said, but there was a center ball, and it is not a layer at all. It is 0, because the first layer is 1. So the central ball is 0. And frequency is second power. Frequency is 0. The second power is 0 times 10. 0 times 10 is 0. Plus 2 is 2. So the central ball turned out to have a value of 2 and always has. Unity is plural and a minimum of 2. And I found then that humanity had been thinking everything in x, y, z coordinates and parallelism instead of convergence and divergence. I found my nucleus, the universe comes to the center of the nucleus, whatever it may be, it's always a center. So it's convergent to the center and then it becomes divergent. So gravity ends at the center of the sphere and turns around, becomes radiation. Radiation turns around, becomes a gravity at the center of the sphere. So I have the sphere, this unity is plural, minimum of 2 is 1/2 is one half convergent, one half divergent, so the 1 plus 1. So there's always a concave sphere, a convex sphere. And concave converges in energy and concentrates it, and convex diffuses, and these are nature's step up, step down transformer of energy concentration. And they're not the same, yet they're always known to coexist. The two-ness is always there. Unity is at plural minimum two. I would like to know why man is here in the universe, I said. I want to think about a complex design. I gave you earlier the Boeing 747. So I say I'm going to take a much more complex design than the Boeing 7, makes Boeing 747 look as simple as a piece of spaghetti. And that would be an eternally regenerative universe with all the 92 regenerative chemical elements, their sociabilities, all having different frequencies, all of them everywhere transforming. With every turn to play, you always have 6 moves. There are always 6 moves with every system. Everyone having different frequencies. If you're not on this, nothing on this button right here, you move through it. So we have so many degrees of freedom, and such high frequency repetition, and more degrees of freedom, that you can get to making daisies and galaxies. I would say then, we find little human beings on board of our planet and given access to principles of the universe, and our muscle absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. 8,000-mile diameter sphere. You and I look so small on it, coming in from space, and the photographs we have taken by the astronauts, when you see through the cloud cover, you see the blue sea, the brown earth, but you can't see a mountain, let alone a human being. So we're absolutely invisible on that little planet at 8,000-mile diameter. And we're a small planet of a small star, but it's one of 100 billion stars in our galaxy. And human beings with principles, running telescopes or multitudes and so forth, photographically, we've now photographed 1 billion such galaxies, operating at a radius of information of 11.5 billion light years, complete sweep out of all the information within 11.5 billion light years of ourselves. That we've been able then, taking the energy coming from those galaxies and run it through the spectroscope, and been able to, little human beings on our planet, absolutely no size at all, an utterly inferior planet, been able to take relative abundance of all the chemical elements present within 11.5 billion light years. Boy, we have that kind of capability. And to go and to photograph the atom. We're dealing, and the mind is dealing in information 99.99% invisible to the human senses. Access these principles. So I said, quite clearly then, we have this information gathering capability on our planet. Our muscle could not be less important in the universe. We're here then for our minds. I say, if I were designing a eternally regenerative universe, I would need some local information gathering capability. Just up in the forward end of that plane, I need local information gathering capability. We're all here as monitors. We're anything here but to get rid of problems, which we often think leisure are going to get rid of problems. The history of all human beings has been problems. That's what we're here for. So we're here as local monitors and have this function. Now I say then, this much we're here for our minds, and we come out of the womb, we're coming out of this womb of permitted ignorance, and if we come out, as I said, muscle is still in control of human affairs. If we come out, it's a stillbirth. And if we do come out with mind in control, then we're on to our new functioning universe. So we're in this is what I call the final exam of man. I think it'll be resolved within the next 10 years. This last chapter will be related to then, assuming human beings are necessary as local problem solvers and want to design us and have us designed with the capability to make experiments and to be regenerated for 80 and 90, 100 years, whatever it is, to make ourselves learn our own principles and keep ourselves going whatever necessary amount of time. And so I see this balance of design is incredibly beautiful. Now, in order to have human beings on board, we're going to use a lot of energy to do all the things we have to do, and to live to be regenerated. I spoke earlier about the vegetation having the function of impounding the sun radiation by photosynthesis. We have then the photosynthetic process taking random energy receipts and converting them into beautiful, orderly molecular structures. This is completely anti-entropic, where we have Boltzmann saying that all the energies being given off entropically by all the stars meant there must be some place where energy is being collected in increasingly orderly ways. But they wouldn't give off anything. They wouldn't know anything about them. In synergetics, we're able to really show how one energy quantum is lost as you convert energy from matter to radiation. It goes from an octahedron, gets precessed in the same 12 topological edges and 6 vertexes and 8 faces, become 3 tetrahedra face to face like that. One quantum disappears and becomes a radiation in this form. Then it has radiation interference and becomes matter, and the quantum reappears. So that we're able now to really demonstrate the topology never changed. The mathematician will never know it changed. Nothing physics could ever know it changed, because the same all the topological characteristics are constant while that energy disappears and comes back again. Now, this is where synergetics suddenly began to give very, very powerful capability. And we have then the Boltzmann concept of energy being exported and imported. And on our own little planet Earth, where we're taking the radiation receipts, converted beautiful orderly hydrocarbons, and other creatures using it, the vegetation being the prime pounder of the radiation. Because it is so, then they have to be rooted. Trees have to be rooted so they have a great strength when winds are blowing. They have to have the winds to carry the seeds from underneath their shadow out to be planted where they get some radiation. And we have to have them water cooled so they won't be dehydrated while exposed to all the radiation. And we have to have them have to be hydraulically designed. So the capillaries, we have pulling the water out of the ground, a one-way valve, and locking it in to give it the hydraulic strength. And then gradually, as it takes some more into the root, then letting it go out through the top to vaporize and to get rain in the sky to keep the whole system going. So we have, because the trees are rooted, they can't reach all the vegetation, it can't reach the other vegetation to procreate. The whole system would break down, where we had also the mammals and the vegetation exchanging their gases to keep this thing going. And we have then, to keep the vegetation procreating, we have all the mobile creatures designed, whether ants, birds, human beings, dogs, counting back and forth. And to get them to do this, they give all the honeybee has a drive to go after honey, and going to flower after flower, and at 180 degrees, bumblingly knocking off pollen. So suddenly man discovers ecology, because everything was 180, and he himself has to survive, and he's got hunger, and he's got kids and so forth. So he's a honeybee, and so what we call the side effects, where he was scared into producing beautiful technology for his war, and inadvertently developing the capability to do more with less to look out for him in the peace time. So I find what man has been calling the side effects of nature's main effects, and we suddenly call it ecology, because the universe is eternally regenerative, is this way. And we have all these 180-degree drives. So I saw that nature's great trick here was to have these 180-degree drives, but to accomplish the general recirculation, to have that life on board this planet, take its part in the total eternal regeneration of the universe itself. Everything seems to be closing in here pretty nicely, as always recirculatory. We have man first, then finding energy, yes, land and food that grew there, guards it. Then later on, we suddenly discover the metals, and they're able to make the tin cans, ability to just preserve the food and move it anywhere. And we find the metals are not where the vegetation was. So there was a new land operation. So first owning the land for the production of food, then owning the mines was the one where you made it. Then suddenly we learned more how to do more with less, and suddenly the metals began to recirculate, so we don't need to have to mine them, all the metals recirculating too. We're getting a complete recirculatory universe. And every time the metal comes around, our know-how is increased, so we take care of more and more people and take care of more and more problems. That is the way the system apparently is trying to operate, and trying to make man a success despite himself. But she had to risk how he was born naked. We had to find our mind. We had to really learn this is so. But now where the information is just about adequate, when you get synergetic about it all, really look it together, it comes out this way. And I now know it's absolutely inherently possible. I can give you 300 buildings for one with the geodesics. And my buildings are at the South Pole, and they are right over the exact South Pole of Earth, and there are 100,000 around the world, and they're top of Mount Fuji. They're only be delivered by air. The only thing could possibly take the stresses, and they're so delicate they let all the microwaves of the thing go through. So that I can tell you logistically, in the terms of environment controlling, in terms of energies available, not living on the savings account which is the fossil fuels, but on our energy incomes, is highly feasible to take care of all humanity, the highest standard anybody ever known. And we're done by 1985. So that's why I know that politics are obsolete, and I know the war is obsolete. I don't know we're going to make it. The nurses are very great.